broadcast any second. It might even be broadcast.
I'll let you know when it's on, because I'll get it better indication than you because it's on your channel.
You'll get a better indication of what than me.
Then it's on, but it's live.
Oh, okay. So I'm just waiting. Once I see it sort of start up on the YouTube, I'm going to run over there and mute it.
There it goes. Okay, you can go and mute it now.
I'm trying, but it's not coming up yet. There it is. Okay, so I muted it almost well enough. Okay, so we're going to start. We don't have a lot of participants, so but we'll just get right to it because it's a big chapter. So the one thing I wanted to do here, so I go here, screen share. Hopefully it works. Share, and then can somebody? Can you?
You're on. I got you.
All right. So I'm just going to read this as just a quick outline of what Chapter 4 was about. So he presents his support for firebrands. And his main point is that the movement needs firebrands. It's not enough to just tolerate them or to say, oh, there's room enough for everyone. No, in fact, the movement needs firebrands. And he's got several arguments for that. Diplomacy alone can't work. If that's the only voice, it's not going to get anywhere. He talks about, yeah, it hasn't yet. And he talks about the Boston bombings as an example. Atheists were excluded. And then the entire past of human history where all we tried was diplomatic means and one little theist at a time, and it's really gone nowhere. So the baby steps. Targets the wrong target.
Damn, this is making me feel good.
I think you might have YouTube on.
Mute yourself.
Oh, am I echoing again? God damn it.
That's all right.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Hold on.
There we go. Oh, he's going to reboot. Keep going.
Okay. Now. All right. So anyway, so it also targets the wrong target when it focuses simply, one believer at a time. Yeah. It misses the larger establishment of religion and the systemic interweaving of religion and power, which comes through the politics that's going on in the United States. He has practical argument. The practical arguments against firebranding pretty much are, it's disrespectful, and practically it says people say it's going to backfire, it's counterproductive, it makes all of atheists look like a bunch of dicks. Samantha Bee had a hilarious piece that Ozzy shared that sort of encapsulates that. He has responses for that, mainly the Overton window, which I think is I'd love to get into that. And that the firebrands create a bad guy against which a good guy can be recognized. It provides something which diplomats can sweep in to soften. The firebrands prime individual theists for diplomats to come in and make their soft arguments. Firebrands induce national level change, humbling religion by insisting on enforcing legal equality and chipping away at the pedestal on which the individual theists place their religion. And he makes a final sort of, there's really no way not to offend a theist, because at the bottom what really offends them is just that atheists exist at all. Therefore, might as well be a firebrand. Even sort of respectful atheists are going to offend even respectful theists. So there's kind of a, nothing to lose argument. I noticed a little sentence where he seems to admit that what he's doing is not a real reflection of his real opinion. He says it only very subtly, and I don't think he could or would ever say such a thing out loud. But I saw something there, and I think that kind of leads evidence for my suspicion that he's being more tactical and not necessarily stupid or sloppy.
I agree.
Yeah. So, okay, then he has another section, all religion is cafeteria religion. And I think the point of that, so he says, they're glued by these divine truth claims that their texts, are divine and true and not erring in any kind of way. So that means that they're stuck to sort of espousing these ancient moral views. And that whole thing keeps religion behind society, and he says, keeps it immoral. And modern apologists, designed to generate a more moral God than the one that's in their texts, and therefore they can maintain something to believe in, have this side effect of covering for more extremists. And he says it increases religion's perceived penetration in American society when moderates do this. It protects the same religion from criticism when bad religious people do bad things in the name of that religion. It makes the religion seem better than it is by giving credit for good religious individuals to the religion and downplaying, ignoring, or flat out denying the religion's immoral teachings. And it distances themselves from and the religion from the bad religious individuals, even while those bad religious people are standing up for the same God and the same religion.
Mm-hmm.
Religiosity as a guidance for the individual is poppycock. So this is sort of his, well, morality, whether he kind of doesn't go into whether there is such a thing as objective morality, but he does point to how morality changes as cultures change and as time goes on. And each believer picks which parts of the text to observe, even when they have justification for their choices, right? So it's not that they just are willy-nilly nitpicking. They may have nice, good support. Nonetheless, they're picking. And this amounts to an individual deciding for himself what's good, right? Anyway, that's really kind of what they're doing anyway.
Exactly.
So he says, where's religion's utility if it includes everything from heroism to genocide? And religious texts give no more guidance than real life. So where are the lessons? And why would the instructions in a religious text be more relevant than in any other teaching? Then he has 3 more sections. One is this little, kind of cute little section on when religious people will say, I'll pray for you, meaning it to be passive, aggressive, and hostile. And he talks about sort of the kind of typical responses that atheists will give to that, and he has some recommendations of what response he thinks is better and why he thinks it's better. Then he gets into sort of firebrand philosophy. There's a section there where he kind of says, he reduces all the sort of, well, the teleological argument, the cosmological argument, the argument for morality. He says, really, 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 it's the same old Neanderthal, where did the rain come from argument. It's a shrinking out of the gaps.
Exactly, yeah.
And he explains why he sees all 3 as being reduced just to that. And then he does kind of say, well, he can't really say that about the ontological argument, but the ontological argument is just a big word game anyway.
Yeah.
And then he has his little Silvermanity is his sort of personal response to Pascal's wager. And finally, he has a final thing, which kind of is just basically science trumps it all in any case. So sometimes theists will try to attack science or scientific methodology or the scientific method, but and he uses evolution to sort of begin that section by saying science disproves it all anyway. And then this other little section about, I think his point is, isn't it silly what religious people are reduced to when they try to argue against science and the method?
That's right. They have to pick and choose aspects of science that counteracts parts they don't like, and they're stuck. Right. Sort of like, your intelligent design question.
Can I just really ask really quickly, is this Helena? Hi, by the way, and
Hi.
hello, James.
Hi, sorry.
Is this your going through his points of his book at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So I just wanted to hang on a second here. Let me stop. I just wanted to kind of quickly review sort of what's in that chapter. And do we have everybody broadcasted who's here?
Yep, everybody's on. We're all 3 of us are on.
Lugo. Okay. All right. So yeah, that's all that was. Did you want to say something, Sty? Because we can start kind of anywhere. I would like to.
I will say this. I'm not familiar with this dude or his book. I only asked if Silverman mentioned any math, and James just informed me nope. So I'm very interested in what he's got to say, because most of it's probably philosophical jargon at this point.
No,
so,
actually,
yes.
He doesn't really use a lot of philosophy. Do you know who Silverman is?
No.
The president
so
of the American
you might
Atheists
remember-
Association.
Yeah. He's the president of American Atheists. You might remember some memes going around about this. Tides go in, tides go out. You can't explain that.
Yeah,
But
Bill O'Reilly.
wasn't that Bill O'Reilly? Yeah, that was Bill O'Reilly.
He said that to Silverman.
That was Bill O'Reilly talking.
Okay.
So the guy on the other end there, the guy with the incredulous face in the memes, that's him.
Yeah, and the guy that stood there, stone-faced, blanked at the incredible dumbness of that statement is David Silverman.
All right. Before I sound really dumb, which I already probably do because I don't know who Silverman is.
That's
Yeah, but
okay.
you're in another country.
You really don't need to have read the book in order to have this discussion.
Okay, so considering he's the president of atheists.
Of American Atheists.
American, yeah.
He's an activist. Go ahead, James.
Okay.
That's okay. Yeah,
You go ahead and explain it because I'm going to deal with the dogs for a second anyway.
Okay. He's the guy that's behind a lot of the.
Is he an A plus?
Yeah, no, he's not. He's kind of touched on that, but he's not an A pluser per se. He's an in-your-face evangelical atheist. He challenges religion at every turn and believes that there's a place for that brand of firebrand atheism, he calls it. It's a shock value. Like he wears atheist T-shirts, pins, hats. His license plate says Atheist 1, right? That kind of thing. Everywhere he can put the fact that he doesn't believe in God in the public, he does. And the book is kind of explaining why he lives like that.
Oh, okay. So he's kind of, I wouldn't say he's on my side, so to speak, but he's on the side that I would lean to more than.
He's on the side that you would lean to more, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would agree.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I really want to talk about, I want to sort of briefly go over the Overton window without getting into, foot in the door, door in the face, foot in the face. Just kind of stick to the Overton window and talk about it because I think that's maybe, Kevin asked me, I can't even tell what side you're on. I can't even tell, do you agree with him? Do you disagree with him? What's going on with you? I'm like, no, I'm just being pretty honest. I mean, I am trying my best. Well, the first couple of times we had a bunch of sort of rabid moderate atheists in here. I did want to play devil's advocate as much as I could. But it's not that all I'm doing is playing devil's advocate. I think he has a real point. And I think that the point he's making about the Overton window is probably why I have an affection for and why I really think I think I really do agree with it. And that was different. I used to think that what I thought was, look, there's room for everyone. And we don't want to silence people just because they say outlandish things or extreme things. Because I believe in liberal principles and I believe in free speech, and there might be something golden in whatever the extremist is saying. No, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was literally gonna follow up there, so I'll let you finish and then I'll follow up afterwards. I apologize.
So now I agree even more after having read this chapter, because what he's really saying is no, it's more than that. You moderates, you diplomats, you one person at a time, baby step believers, which is me, right? I believe that change happens through little baby steps and incremental approximations to something that's a little better. And I could never be a firebrand, but I've always had an affection for them. But it's more than just that. I think he's right. The movement, insofar as it will be and is a movement, needs firebrands.
I agree.
Well, I would say that. Well, let me say this. Do you think that taking the same approach? I mean, I've read a lot of Art of War in my time, just because I enjoy Art of War. Do you think that maybe castigating the people you want to convince to join your side is the right approach? Because if you read Art of War, that's a pretty shitty strategy.
Well, that's a good question. So, because that to me is the strongest sort of argument against sort of in principle what American Atheists is doing as an activist movement is that it's bound to backfire. It's bound to turn everybody off, and it will reflect badly on atheists as a whole because they're the loudest voice. So there is that argument that in fact it will have the opposite effect from the one that's intended.
Yeah.
And is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, it's just like, I think when I speak to most religious people, right, I've been combative in my time. I'm probably sure most people out there were atheistic or have that tendency. It literally goes against your position because if I said to you, Helena, you're a whatever, made some name up, which I won't say because that's not the point. But let's say I say, Helena, you're X, right? Your natural instinct as a human being is to go, no, I'm not. right? But if I can frame a question in another way and ask it in a way that's like, well, what do you think, Helena? Right? So there's a difference there in a psychological way of how to ask questions, right?
That's right, and I subscribe to that method. If there's any method that I use, it would be that one. I think people would say, right? And really it has to do with I have other interests in sort of how do people think and that kind of thing. And this is a good place to sort of explore that. But he's making a different point. He's not saying everybody should be a firebrand.
Mm-hmm.
He is saying that the real dicks are the diplomatic atheists like me who condemn him and claim no one should take that approach.
Well, I would.
Hold on, let me just finish, because he says more than you shouldn't do that, you diplomats. That's, because aren't I an atheist too? He says, no, you need me. We diplomats need the firebrands because it moves the discussion in different directions, and because of the Overton window and that kind of thing.
Well, I can agree that it changes the conversation, but if you look at G-Man versus an atheist, it descends into chaos. You see, the thing is, the diplomats are the peaceful people who go, okay, let's understand each other. Where if you just go around shouting at people, which is often in my case, because most people know who I am, it doesn't end well. So I would say he's right in regards to be passionate about the position that you hold, and that's a fair thing to say. I would totally agree with that, right? And maybe that's a requirement because some people are not so straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say also that it shouldn't be only that, because that can become a detriment. And I've noticed that even with my own experiences with just interacting with people. If I go too extreme, people are like, yeah, you're just being too extreme. And as much as I like you, you just overstepped the line. And in regards to religion and the atheist movement, I think we can also do that. And I'm not an atheist.
Right, and I think also it depends on what you're doing. What is the circumstance you're in at the time, right? But his point is that sort of what drives our little Google Plus hangouts,
mostly
where we're diplomats, and what he wants to say is that without the firebrands, the whole tenor and nature and things in particular, the kinds of things we discuss, would not really move much. So he's saying that the firebrands, they stand outside what is acceptable and pull the bag of things that are acceptable towards the atheist side. And if we didn't have them, us diplomats, if you will, would not be effective. We might be just marginally effective, changing individuals and small groups of people who.
Well, can I use a shitty analogy of magnets? It's probably the worst analogy ever, but it resonates in regards to how to think about it in a very dumb way. Think of magnets, right? Think of if you're going to be a firebrand atheist, then you're going to get a conversation with a firebrand theist. That's not going to work out well. It just isn't.
Well, if you put that conversation on Fox News, then what has that done? It has now allowed for more extreme things to be discussed, right? And it has shifted the window of what's acceptable parlance. Trump, I think, is a great example of the Overton window. So
absolutely,
if you look from a politician's point of view, there are certain things you can discuss and certain things that are just off limits and way too wacky. And the window is sort of the window around what things are acceptable to discuss and still be a respected politician. So Trump took a hold of the window and yanked it, right? And now,
Trump is a phenomenon.
Yeah, and he says, and he
makes
did
the
it.
exact point we're talking about. He has brought the conversation to the place where topics that aren't necessarily ever talked about in a 4-year cycle are now on the table again.
Yeah, and he's put crazy things on the table.
No,
right?
But that's the thing, right? So it's like, even though I think most of the people in this room would agree that we disagree with his positions, right? But I can agree with what your point is, that if you don't have crazy people, how do you know you're normal? And I know that's a terrible way to say it, but how do you know society is the way it is if you don't point it out? If you don't point out its inability, so to speak. Like in the UK, we have political parties called the BNP, UK First, or whatever the bloody hell it's called. But they're basically racist parties, right? But we don't ban them. We let them speak because it's more informative if you let them speak. But they're extreme, right? In that regards, not right, but they're just extreme in their views. But if you deny that to people, then they can't be that. I guess I think what Helen is trying to say is that firebrand, so to speak. You can't have the discussion if you don't have that, which is kind of interesting. So it's
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that complicated. I think for years and years and years, particularly in the West and particularly with Christianity, there have been people who have stood up and yelled, "God, yes." Okay. All the firebrand is doing is saying, "God, no," just as loud. And one of the reasons that they're doing that is because, what we know about sound, if we're going to get into physics, is that certain frequencies and volumes of sound actually cancel each other out. And, that's a, I mean, let's put it this way. I'm a Canadian, so I grew up with hockey. And in a hockey game, there's two kinds of players. Just to boil it down, there's the guy whose job it is to go out and get the goals, and then there's the guy whose job it is to keep other people from killing the guy who goes out to get the goals. We call them the goons. Okay, the goons are there to keep the people who actually know what they're doing on a pair of skates with a hockey stick from getting fucked with, and that's what these firebrands are there for. They are there to counter the people who will walk up and scream in your face and shake your shoulders and and basically figure that if they can yell louder than you can put up with, that you'll accept Jesus. They are there as a counter to that, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
They also are interested in making sweeping, innovative change, right? By shifting the discussion. And mainly with this particular organization, they want to take these sort of, I don't know, the respect that seems to magically be attached to anything religious away.
Do you think it's a necessity, though, to the movement in that regards, Helena?
Well, I used to think, it's funny, because before I read this chapter, I used to just think, live and let live, and I don't have any problem with that. But this chapter has kind of convinced me that, well, one of the things that having that group do that gives to the sensible ones is new things to talk about. It really does shift the whole discussion. And so they're going to be working on laws, and he's going to go on O'Reilly and make very loud, questionably supported claims. And it's going to shift the discussion because it normalizes atheists.
Well, do you think what Gus said? I think Gus made a really important point there, is that if you've got two people shouting equally loud at each other, it cancels out. So that's what I'm saying. Like, for me, it's like, I hate the word militant atheist. That is the most annoying phrase I've ever come across, actually. It's just like, just shut up. Militant and atheist shouldn't even be in the same fucking sentence, as far as I'm concerned.
So see, now you would be one of these, what I call rabid moderate atheists.
Well, he's not an atheist.
I'm not even.
I know. No, I know you're not. I know you're not. I'm saying that attitude, that it's so gross, those militants.
No, it's
I
not
wish
that
they would
right.
just shut up already. Is very prominent in the atheist circle.
I agree. There is a huge movement to shut people down who say things that move the conversation to a point that gets a little uncomfortable.
No, I don't think it's uncomfortable, right? I'm trying to agree and disagree at the same time, being diplomatic, as Helena would say. No, but I'm trying to. I didn't say I was. I just said I'm trying. Whatever. I'm an atheist. I'm not an atheist. I think atheists are just as ruthless, as ignorant, as dogmatic as theists. And the only reason why I say that, because I used to be one. I've come, and this is only my opinion. It's got nothing to do with the atheist community in general. I just think that if you want to supply ammunition to the opposite side, the best way to do that is to piss them off. And I think the whole let's shout people down because we can is just the wrongest strategy ever.
See, but I don't think that's what I don't
That's
think
just
that's
on
a
me.
firebrand thing that we're talking about. You can be a firebrand atheist. You can be an up front, in your face person without offending and without screaming at the top of your lungs.
I piss off atheists.
Well, you piss off everybody,
like,
Scott.
literally.
So don't worry about
but
that.
the
Yeah, well,
thing
that's
is
all.
though, the thing is though that sometimes the goalpost of what constitutes a firebrand gets moved around, depending on who you talk to. A firebrand atheist is someone who may who may simply, rather than diplomatically couch things, they may simply sit there and say, one, there is no God. Two, if you believe in God, there's something wrong with you, but that's fine. However, three, your belief in God should not affect my life in any way, shape, or form through the laws that you enact.
Exactly.
Those people, who will speak those things, what they believe to be those truths, at a normal conversational tone, are often considered to be a firebrand atheist.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like
So
me.
you don't necessarily have to do any yelling. You just have to not be willing to couch things.
Yeah.
And the problem is that there are some people in the world who are best communicated with gently. There are some people in the world who need to be spoken to plainly. And there's room for just about everybody in the argument out there. Everybody serves everybody has a place. Everybody serves a role.
Purpose.
Yeah. So I just want to read a little bit from the book here. I'm on page 81 of the Kindle. And he says, diplomacy alone cannot trump greed, money, and power. That's why diplomacy alone will always ultimately fail to produce the results all atheists seek. That's why diplomacy failed in Boston. I don't think we'll have time to get into that, but it was really kind of a sad story. Anyway, then he says, enter the firebrands. We chip away at privilege, disrespect the unrespectable, and refuse to obey someone else's religious rules. We laugh at threats of hell, literally and loudly, while demanding total equality. We attract everyone's attention to atheists' existence and issues. Firebrands are the movement's awareness generator. Firebrands go on TV, complaining and shouting and demanding. And then the diplomats come out to soften our statements, sometimes emphatically so. In the end, the firebrands look like bad atheists. The diplomats get to look like good atheists. And guess what that means to believers? Good atheists exist.
Absolutely.
This is what I mean by shifting the window.
No, but I think that window is a narrative as well. I think what he's implying isn't. I mean, okay, I'm gonna say this, and most people know me for this word. The axiom of the matter, self-evident, but well, it's not the same thing. But what he's doing there, he's saying we can be position X, and he's saying, well, the same people in our movement are making position X position Y, and I'm like, yeah, but you're the one who's saying that we need to be radical. But then, if you're honest as a human being, you would say then, well, why can't the other side have the same
Well, they can.
mathematical equation? Yeah, and this is the problem. This is why art of war for me is important. If you literally go balls deep, then what do you think the other side's going to do? The best way to not have a war is to not make one in the first place. If you're going to say firebrand's okay and it's a legitimate strategy, then fine, that's in your arsenal. But to say or imply that it's a requirement is folly.
Nobody's
Yeah,
saying
well,
it's a
he
requirement.
would never say it's a requirement.
No, but
And
I'm
he
saying
also
this
would never
to
say
that.
that people who read his book should become firebrands. He is saying that the people who think firebrands are full of it should realize that they need firebrands.
They don't need them at all. This is the point.
I disagree.
The need is
I disagree. You can't. You are not. Listen, there. The other side has its shock troopers, and unless you have them too, you're not going to get where you need to go. It's that simple.
Yeah.
There are people out there on the other side, okay, who will literally crusade in a metaphorical sense in Western society will promote all sorts of
Crazy
strange
shit.
actions, leaving strange actions connected to strange notions, and these people need to be taken on head on by people with absolutely no tact, because that's the only way you deal with shock troopers is with other shock troopers. That militant Christian mom that who's walks around. It says that there has to be a Christmas pageant in school, and all of the kids have to participate, and the ones that don't there's something wrong with them, and
It is.
like that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And that's just one tiny example of what goes on. These people have to be they have to be counteract. Listen, the diplomats are what happens in between the wars, okay? And they're good for settling the wars when everybody's tired of fighting. But when the war is actually on fire, it's not the diplomats who settle the battles.
Well, can I ask a question that I think maybe we're overlooking in regards to his position? As a European, I'm not American, obviously, but do you think that, well, when I watch American media, they seem so far behind Europeans, it's like literally fucking funny. It's like watching Saturday Night Live. Some of the stuff that I listen to, I'm like, wow. So do you think it might be a cultural aspect as well as maybe a positional aspect of religion? Because
I
we
think
dealt with
that
religion a long ass time ago, and
without a
America
doubt,
didn't even exist at that point.
to me, without a doubt, this is
Yeah.
exclusively about American culture and what's happening in America. Europe handled it a different way,
Yeah.
but America can't go that way, right? So we're stuck in America, and this is his, sort of suggestion. Let me just read a little bit. He says, there are two ways to do this. There's the long, hard way and the short, easy way. I'm not so sure it's easy, but it is probably shorter if it works. Anyway, he says, the long, hard way is to continue making an actual case persistently and persuasively until your position becomes more politically mainstream, whether that be due to the strength of your rhetoric or just a long-term shift in societal values. By contrast, the short way is to amplify and echo the voices of those who take a position that are a few notches more radical than the one you really want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I see that's his little admission there. His little sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, nod, nod.
No, I think that's an
The other thing, Stizer, is that your statement, like the world is not the United States and Europe. I mean,
No,
there are okay, but
Stizer,
Stizer, whoa, there are numerous places in Africa where the atmosphere is almost identical to the Southern Bible Belt. We're also forgetting that there are a billion. We're also forgetting that there are a billion people out there who worship a god named Allah, and many of the countries that they live in, firebrand theists literally rule the roost. So
I'm not trying to be condescending.
to say that I mean, Stizer, not to put too fine a point on it, but you never miss an opportunity to tell Americans that they're stupid.
Oh, but
I think in many ways that blinds you to certain strengths and certain realities that don't exist that don't exist in Europe.
No, but I think I will say this, right? We are different kettle of fish, right? Now, do I come across as condescending? Probably. Do I mean it? Most of the time, yes. But it's not because I think Americans are stupid. I think that I've read history books and I know how countries work. And if you're a young nation, and the United States is one, even though they think God made America or whatever, my point is, look, all the things that, like, as a European, right, all the things that Bernie Sanders says are not radical. They're not even remotely fucking radical, actually. They're actually everything we already have. So it's not radical, right? So for me, when I watch American politics, or in regards to the topic that we're talking about, which is how does atheism work in the United States in regards to his book, I think that America's like, oh wow, atheism, what a crazy idea, and should we be radical? It's just like, just look at history books. You can see how it is a long slog, whether you like it or not. It's shitty. I totally admit it. It's a shitty thing. We're going through it right now with Muslims. Okay, is every Muslim coming to kill you? No, right? But there's probably a few that probably will, because they're fucking stupid, and that's
Okay,
got nothing to
that's
do with
not,
the
but
religion.
that's not the point. I mean, you know,
In any
the
case, I
trying
think
to
for sure.
generalize
I
as
think,
possible.
well, for sure. I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like to be a European and look at America, right? I can only kind of imagine it because I've got relatives in France, and it's just they can't even believe this country. It's hard to believe it's a real thing, right? But it is. So we're here, and
Yeah.
so Silverman is saying to the diplomatic atheists, and he's even going so far, although not in this chapter, to say, look, my arguments, they're dumbed down, and we can get into that a little bit when we get into sort of the four arguments that he he dismisses so quickly, right? But and so what he says things in sound bites. He Americanizes everything. He gets away with, or doesn't get away with, depending on who the listener is. But he makes a lot of sort of generalizations that aren't true. He uses some sort of I guess kind of slippery tactics, not exactly honest, putting the other side in a corner where he really shouldn't be doing that technically, and he's saying, I'm doing all of this because I'm a firebrand, and you need me, because if I didn't make these outrageous claims, you wouldn't be able to go into your Google Hangout and smooth over what I said. But because the very topic that I brought to the table with my outrageous claim would have been so outrageous that it wouldn't have even come up in your friggin' hangout.
Yeah, but you know what, Helena, right? I can agree with that. I can agree with what you're positioning, right? But, as a European, right, in regards to atheism, because obviously this is the hangout topic.
Yeah, but the book is based in America, so.
Yeah, I know, but this is the thing. Are we looking through just the lens of America, or are we looking?
Yeah,
Yes.
because he's an American writing to an American.
Yes, I know.
For this hangout, we have to just grant that we're only talking about America
So
currently.
he doesn't give a rat's ass about Europe. He really doesn't.
But don't you think that? I mean, don't
Do
you
I think this can transcend all over around the world? No, because it's a different culture.
Don't you think don't you think Europe can tut America and they should be taken seriously? No, I don't. I think Europe has its own problems, and I think it's just 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. The fact that Europeans have become more secular, I mean, that's great. America's trying to catch up, and they're going to do it their way. Is it necessarily going to be clean and gentle? No. Yanks don't do anything clean and gentle. As Canadians who've lived next door to these people for as long as they've been around, and since even before we were Canadians, we know full well that everything they do is their own particular style. They'll get around to it their own way. But once again, there are other countries in the world where there are firebrand theists that they're holding sway. I mean, again, I'll say it again. If you go to places in Africa, you're not going to see a culture that's that much different theistically from places in the Southern Bible Belt.
It's fucking West, like James said.
And that and we're not even going near the Islamic countries. So
they're the Christian ones, like Nigeria, for fuck's sake.
I mean, this is an important experiment, because we need to know if this is ultimately going to work. And I mean, the other thing too is I'm going to take a bit of a swing at the moderates here, because the moderates sometimes are a little bit on the prissy side. It's kind of like.
Well said, Gus.
They're sort of like, well, I really wouldn't put the argument that way, because not all the I's are dotted and not all the T's are crossed, and there's a couple of details that should be properly aligned with Mr. Snodgrass's universal theorem of partial understanding of theoretical shmesh. And that's fantastic for them, okay? Like in the guarded salons of careful cucumber sandwiches and hot tea and stuff, they do their thing, and that's fine for them, okay? But there's meatball surgery to be done on the television shows. There's meatball surgery to be done on the street corners, and there's meatball surgery to be done in places where people don't have a lot of time, people aren't attuned to nuance, people don't particularly care whether or not it was St. Aloysius or St. Pettigrew that's being cited in this particular catechism. All these people need to know, all the guy driving the garbage truck needs to know is whether or not God is real or not real, for fuck's sakes.
Right, and the guy who's driving the garbage truck, and mainly most of America, I mean, the sort of typical American, they're not into this, these philosophical arguments, the nuances and what have you. And you've got both Christians and atheists who are not into those kinds of arguments and questions, and want to be entertained and maybe challenged, sort of secretly challenged. And I think the firebrand, even with his sloppy language and his, cheating kind of, I agree that they're necessary, because they are what let the Aussies of the world make their finer points.
I don't
Ozzy would have no finer point to make.
Well, okay.
If Silverman didn't make some outrageous statement that got all of America interested.
Just hold on 1 second, Si. There are some communications medium where Ozzy would simply not fit. If you put Ozzy on a Fox News program,
and he
nobody would know. No, listen now. Nobody would know. Nobody would know by the time it was over what his point was.
Yeah.
Nobody would know, because it takes Ozzy a paragraph to make a point. Okay?
Right, because Ozzy's interested in being very clear, very authentic,
and very clear,
true
very
to all the
authentic.
arguments.
That's right. Dots all the I's, crosses all the T's. Unfortunately, there are communications medium that are meatball surgery, and you need a meatball surgeon to fucking succeed. And as long as the point is the same, as long as the end result is the same, ultimately, because of the demands of those medium, how you get there is less important.
The thing that's different in this chapter is the point that Silverman is making, is that Ozzy would not be able to make his nuanced arguments on new topics, on a shift in thinking, but for Silverman being sloppy.
I don't agree.
I completely disagree with that. No, that's agree.
I think David Silverman does from time to time.
I tend to agree with it, because what Silverman is doing is putting on the table, not even nearly as extreme as Trump is doing, but Silverman believes at least in yanking that window further our direction.
Hang on, Sty. You're not the only one in here, okay?
I'm trying my
best. But other people want to talk too. I mean,
so my point is that there is something to Silverman, and that's why I have an affection rather than just a tolerance. I think
okay. I mean, this is my point, James. Before you cut me off, I mean, I don't mind you cut me off if I speak too much. But what I would say is that, Helena, I understand where you're coming from, and I can understand why you think that's the case. But if you look at the evidence for his position, it's flawed. It just is. Because what you're basically saying is, well, I'm against racism and I shout loud. Oh, well, racists can shout as loud as me. That doesn't equate into a policy.
Oh, no. He doesn't simply shout assertions. He has support. He supports his assertions. It's just that the support he uses, it's not so great. Right? It's soundbitey. It makes generalizations. It mischaracterizes religious people. It's a steamroller.
I think if you
generalized, overdone characterization of the other side.
Hang on, Gus. I think what you're
hearing. Let me just finish real quick, and then James, you can go, and then after that, Gus can go. So let's grant that. Okay. Now his point is, you still need me. Because if you want to get in there and go, well, Silverman's not exactly right about this, but what he's getting at is this other thing, and there is a grain of truth in this other thing, because if you look at it this way, and here's some historical evidence, and all the stuff that the philosophers and the diplomats bring in, they're not on the table without Silverman's outrageous exaggeration.
That's right. Let's back it up a little bit. 10 years ago, you had a guy named Christopher Hitchens in his beautiful British accent calling religious people idiots and assholes for 10 years, opening conversations that were closed for many, many years with theologians and theists. It was his walking into that lion's den, per se, and saying, I'm not afraid to talk to you about this. This is a conversation that needs to be had. David Silverman comes in behind and takes that and runs with it and says, we can do more, and this is how he's going to do it. He's going to present it this way. So if you listen to Silverman on Fox News, you don't get a whole picture of how he is. Watch some of his debates and listen to him build on some of these points and make extremely solid case for some of the things that he's talking about and the way he challenges religion on every turn, because it's on every corner. If it wasn't on every corner, you wouldn't hear him be like this.
I'm not going to disagree with what your point is there, James. I think that it's a valid thing to do, but as someone who, like I said, I've read Art of War and all this shit, is it a good strategy? Is the difference.
Well,
I mean, the reason why you've got Donald Trump is rabid, I should say, which would be a better word if I could actually say it, rabid racism in the United States. Now, that's a stark contrast because you just voted for a black guy twice to be president, right? And whether you want to call him mixed race or not, whatever, he's black. Most white people who are racist will call him a nigger.
Yes, he's black, yes.
Yeah, well, whatever. No, the point of this, though, is that America has gone, yeah, we've changed, and that's a fucking good thing. But in terms of what he's saying is, in regards to how we deal with religion, because that's the point of his book, is how you deal with religion, and do we need, the rabid aspect of atheism? Well, yeah, we do need to confront religion, but is that the only strategy? Because I think
He never
strategy.
said it was the only strategy.
He's
saying this is the strategy I use. It will resonate with some. The ones it resonates with, come join me. Let's make our voices really loud. And the diplomats will do the cleanup. But the thing he's complaining about in this section of the book with respect to those diplomats is that they make a mistake to condemn him outright and to wish audibly that firebrand types didn't exist.
That's right.
Because without them, the conversation would go nowhere.
That's right.
That's his thing.
I
would fundamentally disagree with this premise.
Well, you're wrong. The point that Silverman's trying to make with this is when he is being told by the moderate atheist movement that he's wrong and should be shut down. It's just like the liberals and the moderates in every religion shutting down their fundamentalists for the same reason. How dare you show us where we're not motivated to make a point that we should have made years ago. Like, the first atheist existed as soon as somebody said God did it. So this argument isn't an old one. This has been going on since people invented. Okay? So for too long, we've let the religious get the respect they don't deserve, and positions in society they don't deserve and don't need. They've been given access to money they shouldn't get. They've been accessing tax breaks that should be going to help other people that they don't want to give up. So that is not a conversation that the moderates like to have because they don't like challenging people. But Silverman has no problem making those comments because somebody needs to address them. Yeah, that's where his role is. It's nothing else. That's what he sees himself as.
Yeah, I know, and that's it may be a good position to be in. I just think it's lazy.
You're wrong. The other thing too is that, quite frankly, David Silverman is not as wrong as most people who disdain his tactics like to say he is. Quite frankly, he's more right than a lot of the diplomats want to give him credit for.
I tend to kind of agree with you.
And by right, I mean more factual, more correct than more people want to give him credit for. A lot of times, and you know, the reason that I use the word prissy is that a lot of times people who don't like the fact that David Silverman is outspoken will take issue with shit that doesn't matter in the great scheme of things. It's a detail. It's a tiny. There are important details and there are unimportant details. And more often than not, I've seen people take issue with him because of unimportant details.
Exactly.
A lot of this basically boils down to, yelling a message at the top of your lungs is simply not nice. That's what a lot of the objection to his methods boils down to. And quite frankly, it's, you know what, here's your earplugs, you have your discussion your way, there's a space for people doing it my way, if only because there's people on the other side doing the same thing.
You know, he also makes a case that even a nice approach isn't going to go anywhere with respect to theists, because the thing that theists get offended by is the existence of an atheist.
Yes.
No matter how nice or reasonable or well-reasoned the atheist in front of them. Because if atheists exist, it's very threatening. So
there are theists who don't believe atheists exist either at all, period. Because the Bible says so, right?
At least they say that. That's one way to deal with the fact that atheists exist.
That is the most dogmatic thing I've ever heard in my fucking life. Most of you have friends who are theists. Don't be so fucking naive, please.
Well, hold on a second. We do have friends that are theists, but I have experienced personally, and this is, he asked this in his book, right? I think I'm pretty damn nice.
Yes, you are, but
let me just finish, Sty. So okay. I have experienced people, when they find out I'm an atheist, that's the end of my relationship. I didn't change. There's nothing different about me. They found out that I don't believe in God, and now my kids can't play with their kids.
Yeah, but the radicalization is on both sides of the same coin.
Really?
How many atheists do you know? I just said?
How many atheists do you know that forbid their children from playing with theists?
I know shitloads of atheists who don't like me on Google Plus because I just call myself an atheist.
Okay, but that's different.
You've just answered a question I haven't asked, Sty.
No,
yeah, I'd like to stick with the book, Sty, okay? And I'd like to stick with the atheist problem. So let me posit this to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
His point is that even nice atheists, reasonable atheists, logic-driven atheists who make no mistakes and strawman no argument, are nonetheless disregarded and pilloried and discriminated against.
That's right.
And this is the point. This is in the context of the United States. It's kind of weird trying to argue against something when it's actually not true to begin with. That's like me saying, well, what's the best flavor ice cream if I don't know what ice cream is?
Sty, you're coming at it completely wrong. We're not addressing whether their claims are real. We're talking about how do we deal with the fact that they think they're real and they're the ones that hold the power. So,
in other words, in America, this is a situation that does exist. I have been shunned by many, at least 6 theists, right? And I've always been nice. I've never been, firebrand. I've never, yelled in someone's face in a real life situation. I've been diplomatic. Mostly I just pretend, mostly I nod and smile, right? But so even just sort of these little sort of needling questions that even moderate, sweet, nice, wonderful theists will ask, like, what church do you go to? I'd be as diplomatic as I can. I try to avoid until they really push me. But it is nonetheless a fact, at least now in this country that I'm in, that just discovering my views will cause my kid to no longer have her playmate.
Absolutely.
So hold on.
And his point is that what he does with his firebrand outrageousness, even if it's technically incorrect or obviously incorrect is normalizes the fact of atheists.
Mhm.
I
And
don't.
that, and that makes that makes
Absolutely.
it that and then it's not such a bad word.
It makes them
And
down the street kind of people.
No, I don't.
it makes them down the street kind of people.
No, I literally will disagree. I don't think it's about being incorrect. I think it's about strategy.
Well,
And
you're just wrong.
that's no, it's just my opinion.
Yeah, and it's not
Well,
going to work.
you know,
It
opinions
hasn't
can be
worked
wrong.
yet, and it's not going to work.
No, I'm just saying that's my opinion. Listen,
And we're talking about Silverman's opinion. So
Okay, so I think perhaps we should move on to his next topic.
yeah, let's go.
All right. So his next topic, if I don't have my thing in front of me, but I think his next one was this cafeteria business and morality. All right. So I think essentially his point, he takes a long time to get there and does a lot of bad arguing to get there, but his central point is that every theist has these texts, and they're whatever text they have, they have to, they are almost forced to say that these, because these texts are divinely inspired, they hold actual truth. And that comes when you start looking at morality. It means that theists will always be behind society, because when they do make a change in their doctrine, it is done reluctantly and very subtly, so as not to threaten the idea that the text was true all along. Because of this, he says, really, when you look at an individual theist with whatever book they have, they're doing the same thing as an atheist. They're applying themselves to moral questions and coming up with whatever morality they have. And that makes religious texts irrelevant when you really look at it.
Yes, it's true. I agree completely.
All right, so what do we think about that? I think that, do we have a, I thought we had, isn't Green, oh, Green left.
He had to leave. He said he's going to try and come back later, though.
So we don't have anybody here, do we have anybody here who holds to a religious text? I'm looking.
I'm not sure.
So
Not
this
that I
may
know
not,
of.
may not
I'm
be.
pretty sure a lot of us who have come from them can understand what he's meaning.
Okay, well, maybe you could sort of explain a little bit, and then if we don't have, a good,
Okay.
solid argument against his point, we should move to the next one.
well,
Yeah.
no, his point's bang on the money. He's basically saying you can get dogmatic people on both sides of the coin. I literally said that before. He just literally said it. He literally said what I said.
He said the dogmatic people and the moderate people are all the same.
Yeah, but
He
that's
didn't
the
just
point.
he didn't just say you can get dogmatic people on either side. That was nothing like what he
He
said.
didn't infer that at all, Stein.
Going back
Okay.
to actually talking about the Bible, okay? The Bible can basically be divided into roughly two categories of message. One is about the divinity of the creator of the universe and the origins of all things. The second is about how you're supposed to conduct yourself as a person. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, most of this, to an atheist, and okay, from an atheistic point of view, the stuff about the creator of the universe is enormously unlikely, to the point of where it's disregarded out of hand. But the stuff about how you conduct yourself as a person can be further divided into two categories. One of those two subcategories is it relevant today? And the other of the subcategories is it not relevant today? The stuff that's not relevant today, or wouldn't be done today, or whatever, stuff like stoning people for adultery, stoning your kids if they're just getting stoned in general,
Blowing shit up.
that sort of thing is often put to one side by modern Christians, and so you're left with basically, you're left with 2/3 or 3/4 of the Bible for them, 1/4 of the Bible for us. Look, in the whole and in the main, despite the objections by people like Matt Dillahunty to the Sermon on the Mount, in the whole and in the main, if you follow the big shapes in the Bible, you're going to be a pretty decent person, and you're going to be pretty decent to the people next to you. Okay?
Yep, that's true.
And you still have a lot you have to ignore to get there, but yeah, generally.
No,
yes,
but that's
yes,
it's
you
still
do.
true. What Gus is saying is still true.
Yes, you do. But yeah, you do have to ignore an awful lot to get there, and I think that, and I lost my central point. Fucking hell.
Well, you were saying that the at least with respect to Christianity, the big pieces of it get you to a good place morally.
Well, I think what Gus is saying is common sense is in the Bible, and even though we not maybe believe in the Bible, there's still common sense in it, and that's the problem. It's like, well, shit, what the fuck?
Well, I would disagree with you on the common sense part, but yeah.
Well,
Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yeah, well, there's far more in there than that.
Well,
that
no,
wasn't,
but that's the thing that Styes are.
Come on, Sty. You know, that's
Jesus Christ, I can't make a point without you crawling up my ass and dying. Back it up.
Yeah.
Okay, can I just say you two are shouting at each other, not me?
No, I'm shouting at you, Stizer, because you've got Fudd-Mutton's disease. You're every person's question and you're every person's answer.
Okay, so we're not going to go into the meta communication about the communication because I don't want to get derailed. So let's go ahead and stick to the topic. So
well, Gus. I can't now because I'm constantly trying to keep him from nipping at my fucking heels. So I've got one part of my brain trying to figure out how long I can talk before somebody jumps in, and the rest of my brain is trying to remember my central point. And as a fucking result, I've forgotten it.
Oh.
I didn't say anything.
Okay, let's move on. I don't think we have any theists in here that can present the other side, you know, really well.
I can give you my experiences if you want.
Okay, yeah, go. Tell us what it was like, because I've never been like a theist as an adult, so I don't really understand the shift that's required once you deconvert,
right,
or why these texts have so much power. It's just kind of mystifying to me.
Well, for me, I grew up in Catholic school, so I was taught literally from the Bible from kindergarten on. So it was never something that was never discussed. It was always part of life. It was what you read. It was part of who you were. In my teens, I left the Catholic Church for an evangelical Pentecostal flavor and spent the next 25 years, 30 years of my life as an evangelical. I was a worship leader. I'd gone through a couple of Bible schools. You know, I was pretty well into it. And when I was a literalist, I was a fundamentalist. So I literally was Ken Ham without the funny art. I had to believe everything was the way it said in the Bible, or it all fell apart. And so, was the Earth 6,000 years old? Well, that's what Usher said, so it must be true because he used the Bible to prove it to be true. So anything that contradicted that was wrong. So science wasn't right. Science had to be wrong. It just had to make up stuff to prove the Bible wrong. That was my experience. So when you come to relationships, you had to build them on what you found in the Bible. So, you know, you weren't able to tolerate homosexuality. You weren't able to tolerate people who were living in sin or shacking up or not married and having sex. And so you weren't allowed to associate with these people. And if you were telling a lie, you were going to hell, even if you thought you were saved. That's a whole other issue. So when you talk about being that, and then all the flavors of Christianity below that would be considered moderates. Like, Catholics would be moderates, Lutherans are moderates, Wesleyans, Presbyterians, Baptists, everything was moderate. They had ways of interpreting parts of the book that they didn't have in other parts of the book. So then you get all your 43,000 flavors of Christianity around that.
So what he's saying is that when you look at that and you see that each individual religious person is doing this work, making sense out of their text, finding ways to disregard the immoral parts, and finding ways to, you know, beef up the moral parts.
Yes, absolutely. Everything becomes a subjective morality.
So if in fact that's what every individual religious person is doing, then what is the utility of the texts in the first place?
It gives them something to beat atheists on the head with.
No. There are parts of the Bible that are useful. Look at it.
Yeah, but none of those are unique to the Bible.
It's not. But sure. Okay, great. But that's neither here nor there. Just because it's not unique to the Bible doesn't mean that somebody else said it.
They think it is.
No, it isn't.
Hold on.
Just because somebody else said it doesn't make it untrue. I mean,
but I don't think his point is that there. Hold on. Let me try to make a point real quick here. I don't think he's saying that there are no parts in the Bible that are useful. I think he's saying that when you have someone who finds the parts that are useful, it nonetheless renders the text itself, the actual thing that's supposed to be divinely inspired and have no errors, it makes that, why doesn't it, maybe he's asking, why doesn't it make the individual who has just performed that activity realize that the thing that was doing anything was him, not the text?
Okay, but James, are you moving house over there? Like, what are you doing?
No, we're baking. Don't worry about it.
So what about that? You know, to me, when it seems as though, on reflection, when a theist goes, "This is the good part of the Bible," they should go, "Hold on, it's not the Bible that's doing that; it's me that's doing that. There's nothing different from this text than from any other text. It's me doing my own thing with these words." But that doesn't happen.
If you want to look at, break it down even simpler. If this book was inspired by the creator of it all, everybody should be able to read that book and get the same message from it. Surely God is good enough, smart enough, clever enough to write one text that everybody could understand exactly the same way. Unfortunately, our brains don't all work the same way, because you and I could read page 31 of this book, break it down into 14 different things, and not agree on them. That's the way our brains work, and that's why there is no such thing. That there can't be true objective morality in many senses. I mean, I know Ozzy has an explanation as to why there are some things that are objective, but on a whole, morality in itself is subjective. Therefore, this book has some nice suggestions, and it also has some horrible things that you could never do in society. So you would say, well, those were just mistakes, and therefore we can ignore them, like many Christians do.
Well, most of those things that Christians explain away as peculiarities of culture and/or law that apparently is no longer expected to be followed anymore.
Well, exactly.
A lot of that stuff is basically said, that's the old covenant. We don't need to do it that way anymore.
But
I don't know.
a person who's reasoning very well and has their set of morals or what have you, and also has very good support for why this one doesn't apply or that one doesn't apply or this means this and that kind of thing. What's odd to me is that they are going through a process where they are the one who is doing this work. It's not coming from the text itself. It's coming from them applying themselves and their own morality, however, whether it's objective or not is kind of irrelevant, to the text.
Or
the text is an external reinforcement of what their own instincts are telling them. The text acts as not only that external reinforcement, but it also acts as an ability to bond together the aspects of the community, so that they have an idea of what it's okay to expect from each other. Look, listen, Christian communities are pretty decent communities to live in. Yes, they have some peculiarities, and yes, if they identify you as an outsider, they're going to treat you differently. Shocking surprise, so will the rest of humans, whether they have Christianity or not. They will also do the same thing. But quite frankly, Christians are not well, I just want to finish a damn point without interruption. And I'm sorry, but it's going to take more than a couple of sentences. And you're baking anyway, so what do you care? I mean, seriously. The Christian book has a very large degree of utility. If you stripped out the spiritualism from it, it is in the main not a bad way to live your life. And I think
you can say the same thing about all the other faiths.
It's not the point.
Yeah, it is the point.
Isn't the point. The fact that somebody else says it doesn't make it any less true. I'm not yelling.
Yeah, you are.
I am. Okay, well, whatever. Like, fucking, if you're gonna tone cop me, what's the fucking point? Like,
come on, Gus,
Christ Almighty.
Okay, so what I think Silverman is trying to say is that if the individual Christian, since we're talking about Christians, would distance themselves and watch themselves, they would come to see that they are the one doing all of the work. It's not related the text isn't doing anything. They are doing it to the text.
Well, books never do anything, but
Yeah, but for Christians, the Bible is somehow a different kind of book.
I know, but that doesn't change the fact that the Bible still has a great degree of utility in forming a society. If you follow the Bible and you build a community on the big shapes on how to conduct yourself in the Bible, you have built yourself a relatively decent, relatively stable, relatively loving, relatively cohesive community.
And you would be building it on misogyny
compared to, I'm just trying to finish a
well,
fucking point.
Your point is
Let
going
him
on
finish.
long
Compared
enough.
to, and then
You don't
James.
get to fucking decide that, Mr. Dondo. You don't get to decide how long my point goes.
All right, Gus, if you can finish, compared to what? And then James, you can answer. You're building a good society compared to?
Compared to what existed back in the time of Christianity and going forth for a number of hundreds, if not in some cases 1,000, 1,200 years afterwards.
Okay, so
Jesus
James, do you disagree with
Yes,
him?
because if he's building a society based on that book, whether he throw out the Old Testament only and just use the New Testament, you're talking about a society that will be subjugating women, because that's what's in the New Testament. It completely it talks about women being quiet in church, being taught at home by their husbands, not speaking, not teaching, not holding positions of authority. If you think that's a good society, guys, go right ahead. Go ahead. We don't live in that world. The whole Christian culture of North America ignores the misogynistic parts of the Bible because they have to, because we live in a secular world. And so if you think you can bring that culture as a good culture, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Those are parts of the Bible that they ignore for a reason. If you think you can bring them into a society and have that as a good society, you're completely wrong.
But you act like those are the only parts of the society.
Because they don't work.
You act like those are the only parts of the Bible. You act like the bad parts of the Bible are the only parts of the Bible. You see, this is part of the problem.
No, what I'm saying is you can have the good parts of the Bible without the Bible because they're not just in the Bible. That's the point Silverman's making. And I'm sorry you can't see that, but you didn't read the book. So I'm sorry, that's just not the point.
How do you know if I read the book or not?
Because I think you said you didn't read the book.
You think, huh?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. We don't even have anybody in here who can explain it, right? Who still holds to it. So I suggest we move on to the next topic, which, if I'm not mistaken, is that the I'll pray for you?
Yep, that's the next one. Yep.
Okay, so I don't know what to make of this. He makes this point. First of all, he's not talking about the theists who say I'll pray for you when what they mean is you're in a bad situation and I recognize it and I really wish there was something I could do to help you. I'm going to do everything I can to help you. And for me as a theist, the thing I need to do is pray. He doesn't mean those people. He means the people who end a contentious discussion with, I'll pray for you, and walk off. And he talks a little bit about sort of different atheists' responses to that and kind of puts forth his arguments why certain responses he doesn't like as much and what he wants atheists to do, at least those who agree with firebrand methods, is rather than try to come up with an equally ironic or some sort of retort that points to the hostility in the I'll pray for you response. He says just name it. Explain to the person that that's a hostile response. And so he's got a couple of different responses you can give. One of them is just to say that's a hostile response, right? And then the others involve explaining to the person how it is that what they're doing is antithetical to their supposed beliefs and also a weapon. And so one of the things that was interesting to me, and I don't think this would be effective personally, and I'm wondering if anyone's ever tried it. Silverman doesn't talk about any particular experiences or anything like that, but it was this suggestion of positing to the I'll pray for you responder this atheist gun. Do you remember that, James?
Vaguely.
He's
Let
saying,
me see.
so well, one of the things he says to the person who is doing that is, I want you to imagine
Yeah.
that I have a gun. It doesn't work, but I really think it works. And I think that it's a gun that I could point at you and pull the trigger, and it would turn you into an atheist. And that's what you're doing when you're saying, "I'll pray for you." You are asking God to change my brain. And I don't think that that's something that you would like me to do. If I pointed this gun at you and pulled the trigger, you would think that wasn't a good thing to do. I'm not so sure that's a great response to "I'll pray for you."
Well, I would never say that, that's for sure.
So, does anybody have anything to say about that? No.
I think it's wholly unnecessary. When Christians walk away saying "I'll pray for you," essentially, just let them go. There's no need to have the last word. You already have the last word. You're right. So there's no need to have the last word by, I mean, when there's a mechanism. I'll pray for you is basically a face-saving mechanism. Let them save face. The argument's over at that point.
But that's what Silverman's point is it's not don't let them save face. Make them think about what they're saying.
You already have if you've done your job properly.
Challenge what they're saying. Challenge the fact that you don't think prayer is effective and that you could be insulted by that.
But if they're walking away from you, I mean, okay, first of all, I mean, this whole notion of I'm insulted that you're praying for me, that's a bit over the top. I mean, that's a little bit over the top, because at the end, all of prayer, it's just silly, quite frankly. It's silly. It's a silly hill to fight and die on.
So you're willing to let them get away with silly?
You know what? Is there a difference in a fight if you punch somebody in the face 12 times or you only punch them 11 times? I mean, presumably the reason they're walking away from you is because you've already said stuff that's challenged them, and or they're simply, I mean, there's no need to get that last smack in. If you've done your job up to that point, there's a difference between defeating an opponent and humiliating an opponent. And there's no need to humiliate these people. When some of them are basic Christians because they just don't know any better. I mean, I'm not saying that you don't prosecute a fight to its fullest, but there is a place for mercy.
This is kind of where I think there might be a problem with Silverman's whole sort of operations, his sort of house of cards or house of stable, foundation, whatever, whichever house it is. I agree that the firebrands do make these large changes, but I don't agree that it's necessarily a good strategy one-on-one. And so, but he uses it one-on-one, right? So he claims, he seems to imply that he wouldn't use it one-on-one, but he's more inclined to be, I guess, nasty when it's unnecessary, just like Gus was pointing out. And I'm not so sure that that's effective. It seems to me when you're one-on-one and you've got somebody reduced to the point that all they can say is "I'll pray for you" as they attempt to walk away, I kind of am on Gus's side here.
You've already won. That's right.
Yeah, let them walk away. There's no need to sort of, I don't know, like throw a dart in their back as they're walking off.
Can I give you an example?
Okay.
Like, I don't know if you guys know, but I'm a massage therapist. That's what I do. And in my profession, actually, the person that I've been dealing with this is actually in Ontario, Gus, and I'm actually registered there as well. The question came up from a new student. Is it okay if if I pray with my clients? I'm a born-again Christian. I think it comforts me and really helps me relax. And what do you think? Should I just pray quickly for my clients before I start? And I said, well, according to our scope of practice, that is not proper. That is unethical for you to present yourself that way. Pray with someone before you start a treatment for various reasons. One of which is we don't. It's out of scope to apply faith healing or religious aspects or spiritual healing, Aboriginal healing, those are all out of our scope. We're not allowed to do those things as a professional. So there are people on both sides of this discussion. Some support me, and there are a lot of Christians who have no problems with the unethicalness and doing this in their treatment room. Now, am I going to let that go? No, because what that does professionally, it takes my profession to a place I don't want it to go. And we are not faith healers. We are not ministers. If they want someone to pray with, send them back to their pastor. That's their pastor's job. That's not my job as a.
So James, I see your point, but we want to remember that Silverman's only talking about sort of the defeatist I'll pray for you that you get, right? He's not really talking about these deeper issues with respect to prayer.
That's right. Well, again, I won't let that go, and that's what she wants to do. Well, I'll pray with you. I'll pray for you. That's an unprofessional in that situation.
But that's not what David Silverman's talking about.
Yeah, I know, but I'm agreeing with you on part of it. But like I said, I need to ask the context, and there are situations where I won't let that go. I won't let them walk away from that.
Okay, so let me ask you, James, because you're more in line with Silverman than anyone else, right? That I know. So suppose that I'm just thinking of a scene in that Samantha Bee thing, which was hilarious, where there's a Christian and the person who's standing at the booth of the American Atheists, and there's obviously been some kind of heated discussion, and the Christian is out of things to say, and as she walks away, she goes, "I'll pray for you," right? And the atheist representing at the booth, not Silverman, a different atheist, goes, "Well, I'll think for you," right? And my question is, in a circumstance like that, what would you do?
Well, again, it depends on what the conversation was, but if they're walking away with a condescending tone, I'll probably just laugh and let them go. I mean, I got nothing to say. If they're happy being condescending towards me, well, they're the ones that have to go to sleep on their pillow tonight. But if they're standing right in front of me and saying that and not walking away, well, that conversation is going to keep going. Do you understand? Like
yeah, I do. So if they're shooting a bullet at you right in front of you, then they're keeping the conversation open. If they're using it as a closing line, then you would just let them do it.
Let it go. Absolutely.
But the book deals specifically with it being used as like chaff. Essentially, they walk away and they throw it behind them.
Yes.
Sort of like a ninja smoke bomb, right?
Yes.
And then they're gone.
That's exactly right. And Silverman says, pick it up and throw it back.
No, let them have their smoke bomb.
I agree with you.
Listen. You can prosecute this war with all vigor, but the minute we start being vicious or hateful, that's where this is going to fall apart. There's no need to be vicious. There is no need to beat somebody who's already been broken. No need whatsoever.
So this is where I'm developing an idea that there's a difference between sort of public activism, where let's say you're a firebrand. Your public activism is still, nonetheless, at least from my perspective, should be different from how you deal interacting on a day-to-day basis with followers, especially if, as part of your firebrand ideology, you think that every believer is, afflicted with something, with some kind of, illness, right? So, but it doesn't seem as though Silverman agrees with that, right? So he will say, don't attack the followers, or always remember that the followers are only the followers, and who is your real enemy, and be sympathetic and compassionate with followers. And yet here's this section where he's recommending discussing the atheist gun when a follower in defeat tries to save face by saying, "I'll pray for you," as they walk away.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, there's something, what's going on with that?
Let me say something here before we get too far. Gus, I'm sorry, I was corrected. It wasn't you who said that you hadn't read the book, it was Sty. So I apologize for saying that.
That's fine.
Anyway, James, as the even stronger sort of, support for Silverman, what about that?
Well,
it seems like he's only giving lip service to this idea of being compassionate to individuals.
Well, I think I think like it's harder for me to know in that sense because I don't live in America. I live in Canada, and it's really not as big of a deal. I identify with what he says, but I haven't had many conversations where people end with "I'll pray for you." If somebody does get to that point, I would say, well, I would try and keep it going if they're, like I said, if they're not walking away throwing it at me. I'm not going to run after them.
We could expand on that. So maybe we don't hear "I'll pray for you" quite as often as but the major. I think something that we do hear, at least in these circles, are things like, "Well, you'll find out once you die."
Yeah, that's different.
But that's
a completely different claim.
No, it's the same. It's the same.
I understand how you would say that. Yeah, atheism wants to say something real quick.
So you think it's different?
Well, I think that is a statement of faith. And I can, if they want to say that, I'll say, well, I can address that one more than I'll pray for you. To me, it's just, I understand that most people who end up saying that, like Gus says, have nothing left to offer. But if they're making a theological statement on their way out the door, that's a completely different ball of wax. And
Absolute Atheism. Absolute Atheism wanted to say something about this.
Yeah.
So please go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to say that, from listening, I agree. I agree with both Gus and James on this topic. If I'm speaking with a theist, and I have on many occasions, and the conversation goes to the point where it's obvious they're walking away because they're upset because I've made a point that they couldn't counter, and they walk around and with a snarky "I'll pray for you." I'm going to respond with something because they're being a dick, okay? Mm-hmm. But if we're having a conversation,
I don't understand why you want to respond. But
hold on. And then but if we're having a conversation and the conversation went well and we were both respectful of each other, and they walk away and they're like, "Well, I'll pray for you." Then I'm like, "Well, thank you." I guess it just depends on the way it's done.
Right, but that we've already assumed. We're only talking now about the snarky response.
Okay,
so let's just grant that it's a snarky response. Still, you say you would respond, whereas I say I certainly would not. Yeah, I would not. I would give the person. I think there's a benefit to always giving someone a way out, to give them their dignity and their humanity. That cornering someone and trapping them into a corner and shoving them in that corner and not letting them escape is not as good as putting them in the corner and then showing them a way they could get out. Or if they find a way to get out, let them get out. Mm-hmm. So you disagree. Well, sure. So I'm interested in why.
Yeah, it was like what I was saying. If they walk away, clearly they realize that they're defeated and they just want a way out. There's a way to do it without being a dick, without being snarky about it. I mean,
why? Well, who cares if they're snarky? Why does it matter that you insist on pointing out that they're snarky? Maybe that's the only way they can go with dignity.
Well, yeah. The way I guess just the way I see it is, it's kind of as okay, I'm defeated, I'm walking away, but I want to turn around and spit in your eye one more time. And it's like you have the opportunity to walk away with your dignity, and you chose not to. And because you chose not to walk away with your dignity intact, I'm going to respond to you.
I don't know. I think that goes too far. I think that's unnecessary, and probably for me at least the way I look at the world, that's ill-advised. Because people are humans, and when you see someone doing something desperate, to me, that's a signal to back up, not to go further toward them and push them even more. So
what you're basically saying is you're letting them get away with some aspect of being inhumane, while we're supposed to be just letting them go with it.
Well, that assumes that what they're saying is. Hold on, let me finish. That assumes that what they're saying is inhumane. I don't think that's true.
Depends on how it's thrown, I guess. But I see what you're saying.
But you've already beaten them. They're beaten. That's why they're running away, throwing snark over their shoulder, because you've already thrashed them. And the problem is that regardless of whether or not it's snarky, it's still ineffective. It's ineffective. I mean, you've beaten them. You won. I mean, the whole "I'll pray for you" thing ultimately just makes them look stupid. You know, and
Well,
so
I'm not
you
disagreeing with you at all.
get the moral ground by the moral high ground by fiat.
I think there's something, just this is not related to Silverman, so maybe I shouldn't bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. I want to talk about this. I've never heard anybody answer me about, about this. I really think that when you present something to someone and it's a challenge, you should, I'm going to say it, you should either give them an out or allow them to have their out. And I've got a little, I'll give you a little example. I was really, really young. I was in this play. I think it was, I don't remember even the name of the play. But I will never forget what the director did for me. So it was during sort of, the review after a run through. And he said, I'm interested in that you've made that character say blah 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 Proust, because maybe it hints that the character doesn't know what she's talking about, right? And that was like the perfect correction. He made his point, but he didn't force me to acknowledge that I'd never heard of Proust, right? I was really young, and I was just reading it, right? And so that is the kind of thing that is that is beautiful, and that is, I think, something that we should all strive for. I didn't think, I took the correction, and he saved my face, and I will never ever forget that. And I don't see why snarkily responding to someone who is already reduced to snark is beneficial in any way. You punish someone for snark? Well, why have they been reduced to snark? Because they're already humiliated. Let them go.
Sugar wants to say something. Are you there, Sugar? We don't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
She says she's talking.
You might be muted.
Yeah.
She's going to refresh. So what about that? Somebody answer me. You've got someone in a corner. They're trying to escape, and I say let them escape. They will reflect later. And you say no. Put your foot in their way. Don't let them escape. Let's discuss that.
I just do myself in that case. I don't know. Sometimes it can be you're just trying to pin them down and really just highlight it, even though it has been highlighted that they got them on that point. I'm not too sure. It's probably case by case.
It is. I think mostly it's case by case and behavior pattern by behavior pattern. I mean, for instance, if you're trying to keep a child from doing bad behavior, like for instance, a friend of mine had a kid who went through a phase where he was a firebug, okay, and that's really dangerous. And so when my friend finally decided to sit down and reprogram this kid, it wasn't enough to let the kid sort of be flippant and kind of like he had to understand that there was no correct response, but no, daddy, I will never light another fire again, period. But there are other instances where Helena's basically right. The person's been defeated, and if your response is to step in and go crunch, you're almost being counterproductive. It does depend on the situation, but I think in the specific situation that David Silverman is talking about, and being hyper-specific to that situation, I think Helena and I both have the right of it. Within those confines, I think just let them have their thing. But there are times and there are situations where it isn't enough for them to sort of walk away with their beliefs intact, because that could be dangerous. But you have to really be careful of which one is which. because if you're not careful, you can get exactly the opposite response that you're looking for. One size does not fit all.
So we're going to let Sugar, if you still want to make a point, and then James wants to read something out of the book. So Sugar, did you want to talk on this?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yay. I have another side of it that I was thinking about. You know, I think it's nice to consider the other person, but I find that we focus outside of ourselves far too often, and that has almost become a sin, right? Appropriate confidence, appropriate self-management, selflessness seems to be, you know, not good, and I would like to say that screw some people. They can say what they want, but depending on where I am in my development and what I'm needing at that time, I think I would like to reserve the right to speak my mind if I want to, and not speak the mind if I want to. But I do have that underlying feeling that you have, Helena, that says, why humiliate somebody? What is the purpose? What's to be gained? You know, that's me at my core. But yet I also find that sometimes you just have had enough, and you make those judgments, right? It's as if though some people that we're not able to run our game, right? We're not able to grow within ourselves. That's not appropriate. Like, I even find criticism of Silverman or Hitchens or anybody really. Why be so critical? And I'm not saying that you're being critical, but I mean, I think the way we look at it, sometimes we might want to say, find another way to explore it without it being so polarizing, right? That it doesn't have to be a criticism, because the man is where he is in his world. He's grown as much as he can grow, and he's got stuff to learn, and he's learned a lot of things, and we're all in our own spot individually. So
what this is the point. But that's the point, though, Sugar, isn't it? If you're in a position, then you can't really say, well, it's somehow kind of like inherently true. It's like we're all trying to find our position or whatever it is. But to go around to say that just because my name's X, Y, or Z, therefore, you know, it's like Sam Harris. I fucking detest the guy. He's an atheist. But he just says this dumbest shit I've ever read in my fucking life. And people want to, like, cozy up and warm to him just because they find it, I don't know, fucking interesting to do so. They, you know, people groupthink a lot. And that's sad. That's how you get, like, the radical feminists, right? Like, I'm for feminism. I'm a fucking guy, but I believe women should have the same rights as men. But if you go on YouTube, it doesn't come across that way, right? It's like, fucking holy shit, it's just like
Yes, and James wanted to read a passage.
I'm gonna read, just kind of recap that section. I think we're getting away from what's
just go ahead and read
right?
the section.
I'll read the first part of it's irrelevant, but the part we were talking about right here is it's useless, and if they know I'm an atheist, insensitive, but not malevolent. What I'm talking about is I'll pray for you while debating or discussing religion, said by someone hoping for some divine intervention to help me see the light, usually served with an extra dose of smugness. So that's what he's talking about, not what we've been talking about. He's talking about having someone actually in the middle of a conversation say, I'm going to pray for you, hoping God changes your mind. This is where the analogy of his atheist gun comes from, whereas he's going to hold this fake gun, I think it's going to work, and then now I want you to change your mind. That's where his analogy comes in. Does that
do you think that's sufficient, though?
Do you mean effective?
Yeah, well, I would say, well, I chose the word sufficient, so I wouldn't say effective. But
I thought you said efficient, sufficient. Yeah. You mean it's not enough?
Well, yeah. Well, it's like, is he saying what James just read out? Do you think that would be sufficient? Or in that regards,
I think it goes overboard.
That statement acknowledges God. That makes the atheist acknowledge God. I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah, it's just weird, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, if you said that to me as a rambunctious, or whatever you want to call it, rambunctious, depending on your
Passionate.
pronunciation. Yeah, whatever. If you're gonna say that to me when I was, I don't know, 20 something, I would just told you to go fuck yourself at that point, because I was so hateful, and literally this is the truth. I was so hateful
Mhm.
of religious people that it blinded me to logic, and that's the point. If you get so hateful in your rhetoric or your tone, you actually do more harm than you would do good. If you just said, okay, I accept God, right? Now what? If you're gonna be a shitty human being, I don't need God to judge you. I'll judge you because you're a shitty human being. This is how you catch out theists at that point. You don't judge them on God. You judge them if they're shitty human beings or not. That's the catch-22 that they don't
So,
like.
so
Okay, so
here,
to
here's
close
the
off,
final. Here's the
this
last
section.
point of the this section. This is
Okay,
the
go ahead.
last statement. He says, "Don't pray for me," I tell them. "Accept me as I am instead." That's the bottom line to challenging the "I'll pray for you." He
Yeah,
wants
that's
he
his
wants
bottom
them,
line.
yeah, he wants them to say, "Look, you're okay the way you are. You can hope that I could get to your point of view, but if you aren't willing to accept me as I am, then I'm not the one with the problem." That's why he addresses, "I'll pray for you."
Yeah. All right. Let's move on. I think. I mean, if this group has come to any consensus, it would be that it's a case-by-case basis, and you can't. There is no such thing as isolated things. Everything is in context. So nobody can really make a declarative statement about what they would do or should do, because it's a circumstance by circumstance situation.
Well, I'm an atheist. I declare all people stupid. I'm going out there on a limb. I'm saying, look, guys, atheist and theist, they both love each other, but they've just got a fundamental
And with the broadest brush possible, I can find a way to offend everyone.
All right, so we are now into the firebrand philosophy section.
Oh, God damn it, God.
Okay, so here we go. Now this is pretty easy, right? So he reduces the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, and the argument about morality, or the argument from morality. He says, look, all of those are shrinking God of the gaps arguments, spruced up with modern language. It's the same as when the Neanderthals were like, where's the rain come from? I don't know. There must be a God. Right? So let's first discuss that. Can those three arguments, just those three, right? Let's not bother with ontological. Can those three arguments, so the cosmological argument is the argument that, that there's got to be an explanation for the existence of the universe. This is him talking. The teleological argument is that the universe obviously has a purpose, and so now we have to explain the purpose, and that the only possible explanation is a God. And the argument from morality, from his point of view, is the same. You just make a claim that something moral, either morality itself or some aspect of morality, exists, and then you say there must be an explanation. We don't have an explanation, therefore that's where God goes.
Can we go backwards, Helena, in regards to how we're gonna have a conversation? Can we start from the third one, because the third one to me it just rings alarm bells, because you just said the claim. That just is awesome. So can we go backwards? If you don't, I mean, you can tell me to fuck off. I don't mind. You can go forward.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't tell you to fuck off just for asking that.
Yeah, but I think the third point that you raised is really interesting, right? Because I had the same hangout, even though it was on Xbox's channel. It was technically supposed to be my hangout or whatever. He said in the hangout with me and Daryl, because me and Daryl are non-cognitives in that regard, or atheists, or whatever you want to fucking call us these days. He said that he can defeat the argument because he can coherently make a definition of God. And then he said God could be a programmer and The Sims, and I was like, but that just sounds like the Bible. And
Right.
he didn't try and kind of understand what I was saying. It's not like I'm saying you can't have a coherent idea. I'm saying, okay, if you get an idea, then what happens afterwards? At that point?
Right.
You
So I mean, okay. So, but he was basically saying, it sounds like, taking the cosmological argument, right? He was saying the universe is here, and we don't have an explanation. We need an explanation. The best possible explanation is a God. Is that correct?
No, it's not.
Oh.
It's literally a claim. It's the
No,
exact
but
same
is that what he
thing.
was saying? Your
No,
opponent?
no, I don't think he's saying that. I think what he's saying is we have to rationalize. I mean, look, I'm not going to agree with everything he says, but I think, look, at the end of the day, I have to admit, I'm biased, okay? I literally am. I'm in his camp, okay? I mightn't agree with everything he says, just like Sam Harris, but if you're agreeing that people make certain claims, then we just have to call them for what they are, which are claims. Now, he's suggesting a position that I agree with because, well, what the fuck else are you going to do? Are you going to say that Christianity's true, or any god for that matter? And he's not suggesting that. He's just saying, look at it rationally. And I will agree with this position, or Mr. Silverman's position at that point.
Okay, so what I want to talk about mainly with respect to Silverman is this idea that those three arguments are are all of them God of the gaps arguments. It's the shrinking God of the gaps. So he says that with respect to all three of those.
Yeah,
right?
and
So I mean, the
basically
teleological
are.
one, okay. I mean, that one's the God of the gaps being accused. I mean, a lot of people accuse the explanation from design, the teleological argument, as a God of the gaps argument. He's saying, no, look, bare bones. It's the same as where'd the rain come from? But not just teleological, but also the cosmological and even morality, because the argument for morality just starts by saying that morality exists. We don't have any explanation for it.
Hang on, Sty, hang on.
Sorry.
So
I just wanted to get math at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm interested in cosmological and argument from morality as being seen as a God of the gaps. Can we really do that? Is that a fair thing?
I would hesitant to say this, but I'm going to say yes. I'm just going to go with the cosmological point. The morality thing is not even void as a rational argument. I don't believe morality's got anything to do with the creation of the universe whatsoever. So I'm gonna leave that in the bin where it deserves to be. But on the cosmological side, we all know this person called Matt Bell, and he uses the Callum cosmological argument. Now it's one type of an argument, but you can't say therefore is, just because you don't know anything. That's the most stupidest fucking answer to any fucking question I've ever heard in my life. And Silverman's literally pointing that out. He's saying, yeah, that's the stupidest saying. Just because there's rain and we don't know how it rains, therefore God. That's literally what he's saying. And
you sound like Silverman. So Silverman first says, look, let's imagine Neanderthals. Let's assume that there are ancestors, and let's imagine. And they were like, what's this rain? Where's it come from? And they said to one another, I don't know. And then they posited God. Now he's saying that it's the same reasoning to go, what's this universe? Where did it come from? I don't know. Oh,
therefore
let's
God.
Posit God. Therefore God.
It's exactly the same. So I totally agree with this position on the whole cosmological part. The morality.
So if you agree with that, his next step is he goes, why is this happening? How come we're not still arguing about rain? It's because science explains things that used to be in religious things that used to be explained by religion. Science systematically switches that, right? So we learned where the rain came from. We learned, this and that and this and that. So here's one where science hasn't yet been able to fully explain.
But it never can.
Well, even if it never can, it never can is an interesting thing because
science is never. I mean, I think this is the thing for atheists to actually learn to understand.
Tell us.
Debates with theists. Science's job is not to explain why the universe created or was created, right? Scientists' job is to explain how the universe works.
Well,
This-
so the why
that's
how is a
completely
different thing.
Yeah,
But let's
no,
just.
they're completely
Yeah,
separate. They're
You
couldn't
don't
completely
think
separate.
that
explain.
science, if it could, would explain how the universe came
Yeah,
to?
but it can explain how the universe works. It can't give you a reason
Well,
why
it could give you
exists.
how it came about, but it
Yeah,
won't
how
explain
it came
why.
about. Let's screw the why. I mean, the
Yeah,
why
It
has a
can't
lot
do
of
the why.
presumptions.
That's
yeah.
The
not
why,
its
The
hold on,
why.
listen, stop. The why has a lot of presumptions under it. We don't even need it. Let's just stick with how for this talk.
Hmm.
I think if science could explain, and in fact they are working on that, aren't they? If science could
Hmm.
explain how the universe came to be, then would the cosmological argument disappear?
The cosmological argument was professed by someone who's religious to begin with. It wasn't
know.
professed by anybody else. It was a religious thing. The Big Bang Theory is religious. Many people don't know that who bothered to not read fucking science books.
Well, it's not religious per se, but
Literally it is. That's where it got its.
yeah, but I mean, it isn't
Ball.
religious itself, but it came from someone who was a priest. Yes.
Well, the entire concept of Big Bang is the entire concept of God made X. It's literally the same thing. Like, I'm not kidding.
No, the Big Bang itself isn't religious, full stop. But it was coined by the idea was coined by a priest. Yes, but it in of itself
Well, isn't that what I just said?
No, you said it was religious.
It's religious in its context of the creation of the universe was created. That is the entire fact that humans need finite and infinite to actually rationalize their own existence is the problem. You do understand the difference between 1 and 0, right?
Okay,
Do you know,
so
do you know how long it took the human race to actually figure out quantity? Like literally in mathematics. I'm not kidding you, right? If you're like me, right? I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a scientist. I make computer games, right? Kind of. But if you literally read the history of mathematics and you understand how long it took the Indians who gave us the number 0, how long it took us to literally quantify what a 0 is when regarding how we actually use multiplication and all this other crazy shit, it took a long ass time. So for us to willy-nilly go about the place going, oh yeah, well, God exists in a timeless space and all that shite. Well, you don't even know what that is.
Well, yeah, the whole concept of God being outside of the universe and so forth is a fairly recent thing because they as in primitive humans thought no, not even before Christians, that their religious beings were in the world, whatever was in the. So in Egypt, they thought the sun going up and down was the battle of the two gods. They thought that they were literal gods, having
but
fights in the sky.
that was only one aspect. Though. You can't say that was the narrative at the time.
No, pretty much the vast majority of ancient religions.
No. I'm telling you, that's not true.
No, the vast majority of ancient religions have.
The vast majority of.
Sir, it's very difficult to know what you're countering when you haven't even heard it.
Because it's just he's saying.
So Odin, the Egyptian gods, they were trying to explain the natural phenomena, as we all know.
Yep,
so they literally thought that these things were within the world itself. They didn't think of them as timeless, spaceless things.
I'm not denying the fact that what you're saying. I'm just saying they're relatively new concepts to the human race. I mean, go and look up Native Americans. Fuck all to do what you just said, and they were here way before that concept that you just mentioned. I'm sorry about your luck, pal, but that's called history. Just saying. Just because it's popular doesn't make it the fucking truth.
Which were Egyptians, which well before the American.
Most people who watch fucking Ben here think fucking Jews are white. They're not.
Okay, so here is how Silverman goes about this. The first one he talks about is the teleological, right? And he says that's a God of the gaps, and I think a lot of people agree with that, which is why I think he went first. Then he says, let's try another one, cosmological. It's an even more blatant ripoff of its Neanderthal roots. This is his claim, right? So, quote, cosmological argument is the argument that the existence of the world or the universe is strong evidence for the existence of a God who created it. The existence of the universe, the argument claims, stands in need of an explanation, and the only adequate explanation of its existence is that it was created by God. So then he says some snarky stuff here about we can dispense with purpose and design.
That's me.
So here we go. Neanderthals asked about the rain. Where did it come from? Nobody knows. Therefore, God did it. Just like the Neanderthals' rain, God is, quote, the only adequate explanation, end quote. Because for some reason, we don't know is not an option. There, science. That's the end of his.
Well, I don't think it's a claim. I think what he does there, in a very witty way, I would say, is he just points out the fact that human beings have got a fundamentally flawed concept of reality. One, we don't know how.
103 on Kindle, by the way. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just going to say I'm going to agree with Mr. Silverman on the point that you just made. Is the fact that human beings don't like to accept the fact that we don't know shit. We find it like really irritating, and he's just putting the fact out as like, well, we can just make shit up as we go along and call it whatever the fuck we want, and then you can either accept my crazy shit or you can't. That's all he's saying, and it's true. It's shitty, right? If you think about it, but it's fucking true nevertheless.
So you agree that the cosmological argument reduces to a God of the gaps?
Yeah, it's just bullshit. It's just like, well, I've got a claim, idea, whatever, and if you don't accept me, well, I'm just gonna shout at you at that point. There's no evidence there at all. It's just he's just pointing that out. He's not saying anything radical. I don't believe that's a radical statement. I think it's very true. I just think he's pointing it out.
Okay, so Sty, a lot of sort of atheists, I guess, or I don't know, a lot of people who oppose these arguments will agree that the teleological argument, the argument from design, is a God of the gaps argument, but won't go so far as to reduce the cosmological argument to a God of the gaps argument. But you seem to be agreeing with Silverman that it is one.
It is, because it's basically bullshit. I mean, it's basically Ray Comfort on steroids.
Well, I would suggest you provide more substance instead of just saying that.
Well, I just speak the way I do Monsanto. I just agree with this position. It's not a big.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to justify it.
I'm not trying to justify. I'm just saying I agree with it. I'm not.
If you did ask a question, so I would say that.
I agree with this position. I just think it's bullshit.
And elaborate on that. That's the point of discussion. So with the God of the Gaps. Yeah, I would have to agree as well. I mean, he's with the God of the Gaps. It's negating God to a minuscule kind of explanation or so forth, and the Kalam does that.
Well, the Kalam itself, or the cosmological argument, came from religious people. I just said that. It's a historical fact. It's not like I just made that shit up.
Well, we know that. Nobody's disagreeing with that. All three of these arguments that he says are nothing but Neanderthal rain arguments come from religion.
Yeah,
that's okay.
No, but what he's doing is he's trying to put them in a context which makes sense. What he's saying is, look, if you're going to make up shit, that's fine, right? But if the facts don't back up your making shit up, then I can destroy them. Hence why I agree with Silverman. Now, I just said before, I don't agree with some of his positions, but in the case of what you're saying in the context of, the hangout, fucking yes, he's on point. And if you want to disagree with it, then show me any evidence of anybody making the universe, because there isn't any. And if you think so, well, you would be technically God at that point, and you're fucking not, as far as I'm aware. So, yeah, Silverman wins. Silverman won, other people nil at that point.
So I'm following the outside chat, and there's a bunch of guys that are far more philosophical than Mr. Silverman.
Why aren't those assholes in here?
Well, they're scared of you, I guess, Helen.
Oh,
What they're saying, basically what they're saying is that the cosmological and teleological aren't necessarily God of the gap arguments formally, and I'm trying to explain to them that Silverman isn't a sophisticated philosopher here. He's appealing to a specific group of people who have no idea what the God of the gaps argument is, other than it's trying to plug God in somewhere that doesn't belong. I mean, for years that was my understanding of a God of the gap argument.
well, for me, the God of the gap argument, the layperson's idea of what the God of the gap argument. Oh,
wow. Hello,
sorry.
loud person.
Sorry. My house gets busy. Let me just say, I think the God of the gaps argument in general sort of is the idea that you've got some phenomenon that we can't explain, that we don't know where it came from or how it arose. And because we don't know, that's a perfect place to say, oh, well, that's God. God created.
God, yeah.
Yeah. So, is that not what the God of the gaps argument is?
Well, he's not specifically saying it, right? But what it does in his questions, or I would say his answers or summarization of his points, is he is implying that. So you can use the God of the gaps. I think that would be a fair notion in my summation. I think that would be fair, to be honest. I think that would be fair. I think it would be fair to say it's not God of the gaps, but it can be used as in this conversation to, is it one, right, in that regard.
Yeah, so right. I mean, is it at root? I mean, even if they have figured out a way to make a deductive argument out of it, right? So, is it nonetheless at root saying, we don't know, therefore God? And to me, he's got a point.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but like I said, I mightn't agree with some of his positions, but in this part of the hangout, he's bang on the fucking money. And welcome to Ozzy, and someone make sure he's broadcasted, please, if you don't mind.
Oh God, someone has to broadcast Ozzy.
Get Ozzy in the fucking room.
I think Ozzy's going to explain these nuances, and I think it's going to be worth it to hear.
I don't think the nuances. I just think the points that he raises, right, in regards to how it can be, in regards to how you look at philosophical points, but then at the same time, if I needed to, I could use Noam Chomsky as a backup, because this whole we know shit is predicated on a claim, and that's the sad part.
Well, that's true. That's true. But Silverman doesn't get into it, so I'm going to ask that we just put that on a shelf for another hangout. Okay. What Silverman's trying to say is that these three arguments, the teleological and the cosmological and the argument for morality, really at root, when you look at them honestly and objectively, are Neanderthal-ish God of the gaps. We don't know, therefore God. And now Ozzy's going to explain how that can't be right.
No, he's going to explain why it is correct, because he used to be a God of the gap kind of guy back in the day. I've interviewed Ozzy, and he's going to say, yeah, you can hold that position.
Jesus, you'd never know that Ozzy was actually here to talk for himself.
I was about to shut up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you've ruined my beautiful introduction.
Sorry, I was trying to shut up. It's not hard. It's not easy.
It is hard, Stein.
All right, everybody mute. It's time for Ozzy.
You know,
Ozzy.
known as to mute. Sorry, my camera's not working. Yeah, so this is something that gets said a lot. I hear a lot of atheists say that such and such an argument is a God of the gaps argument. And I think that gets said because an awful lot of people don't know how to put forward these arguments, and very often things like the cosmological argument and teleological arguments and so forth are put forth in a very clumsy way, where they really are God of the gaps arguments. Okay, but strictly speaking, a God of the gaps argument is a species of argumentum ad ignorantium. It's an appeal to ignorance. It's an argument from ignorance. It's saying, and an appeal to ignorance is when you say, we don't know such and such. There's a hole in our knowledge over here. Therefore, the explanation must be this. Right? That's an appeal to ignorance, right? And the God of the gaps argument is just that kind of argument, but where your gap filler in your knowledge is just God. So you're saying, you know, there's a piece of ignorance here. We don't understand how this works. Therefore, God. So it's just a species.
So far, Silverman is claiming that. So far, Silverman's with you. He's saying that the missing knowledge is from where the universe, we don't know. Therefore, fill it in with God.
Right, but I mean that would only be an argument. That would only be a fair characterization if a theist or an apologist were to come along and argue it as follows: we don't know how the universe works, therefore God. That would be an appeal to ignorance, or we don't have an explanation of how the universe came to be. Therefore, the cosmos came to be because of God. That would be an appeal to ignorance, right? But a cosmological argument, like let's take a Kalam cosmological argument. Almost everybody knows it.
Mind's gonna explode.
That's just a straightforward deductive argument, right? Everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. The universe has a cause of its existence. The universe began to exist, rather. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. That's just a straightforward, deductive, formally valid argument.
Yeah, but hold on. You can't ignore the fact that at the time of that proposal, the actual answer, which is Kalam, who was a Muslim, was the exact same thing that Helen just said. Therefore, God. You can't ignore that. That was actually proposed by mathematicians who were religious. Dude, come on, please.
Okay, look, the Kalam argument is not an appeal to ignorance. There is no premise in there where you say there's a mystery here, we don't know how to explain it, therefore God has to be the explanation.
Okay, can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. Was Kalam the guy who came up with this? Well, it wasn't the only one, but
Kalam is not the name of a person.
It actually is. It's a second name, actually.
No, it's not the name of any person. It's the name of an argumentative, theological, apologetic tradition.
Named after a Muslim mathematician who believed in.
Okay, I don't think that's correct, but okay.
No,
people can Google that.
All right, well, let's leave that aside, right? Let's leave that shit aside. The point is, right, if you're going to propose something, right, and you're a smart guy, if you're going to propose something, right, we would call that a claim or a hypothesis or whatever the fuck you want to call it, right? So it's a something, an idea, a concept, right? We can all look at the concept as individuals and go, well, okay, we can disagree or agree, but the notion that it's inherent in human beings to know about God, it's fundamentally flawed, and that's what Mr. Silverman's saying. He's saying, just be honest. That's a flawed statement.
I don't think that's what he's saying, but in any case, where there's an inferential gap, just because there's an inferential leap in an argument, doesn't make something a god of the gaps or an appeal to ignorance. Every fallacious argument, okay, that involves a fallacy with the reasoning, not with the premises, but with the reasoning, right, where the conclusion doesn't follow, right, is going to be a non sequitur. There's always going to be an inferential gap whenever the argument is formally invalid, right? An inferential gap is not an appeal to ignorance.
I don't agree that this is an inferential gap situation.
I think so.
I didn't hear what Helena said there.
Right.
I'm not so sure that this is one of those cases of an inferential gap. But let me ask you this. The way you've described a God of the gap argument, I've never heard anything like that. I've never heard a theist go, look, we don't know, therefore God. I mean, they never say it like that.
Well, they do. They sometimes couch it slightly differently. But yes, you will actually hear people say that. But no sensible apologist who actually knows what these arguments are is ever going to stumble into a God of the gaps argument that clumsily, right? That isn't. I mean, the average person on the street who has not studied any apologetics, but who is religious, who is confronted with someone's incredulity about God's existence, will say something. Well, how do you explain the universe? Right? Well, that is an implied God of the gaps argument. There has to be an explanation. You don't have one, therefore it has to be God.
No.
That is a God of the gaps argument, and we've all heard that argument.
No,
and
I don't.
Silverman's contention. Hold on, Stibe, just one second. Silverman's contention is that the cosmological argument is that it's just dressed up in fancy language and simplified and sticks like with Kalam. It sticks the word "begin" in there so that what it's doing is masking the fact that it's actually a God of the Gaps argument.
It's not a God of the Gaps argument. There's all kinds of things wrong with the Kalam cosmological argument, okay, and the Aquinian cosmological arguments. Right? There's all kinds of things wrong with this, okay. But you've got to get your fallacy straight. If you're going to accuse an argument of being wrong, you've got to be right about what's wrong about it. And this is what I don't like about Silverman here. When he says that teleological arguments are God of the Gaps arguments, well, yes, there's a way of putting forward a teleological argument that is a God of the Gaps, right? But there's also a way of putting forward a teleological argument in abductive terms, in terms of inference to the best explanation, okay? And that is not a God of the Gaps argument. The argument can still fail for other reasons, right? An argument for God's existence can fail for any number of reasons. It doesn't have to be a God of the Gaps. It doesn't have to be an appeal to ignorance.
Yeah, but I don't think he's saying that in his second part of what we're discussing. He's saying that. Well, I think Helena, and I would agree with Helena. I think what Helena's saying is that if you have an argument or a point, and you're saying X, Y is ambiguous, that is a God of the Gaps.
No, that is not a God of the Gaps. Here's what I think Silverman is driving at, but he's getting it wrong, and this is where I think the intuition is coming from. Okay, people point to mystery. They point to things to the unexplained, and there they try to confect an argument for God. Okay.
Absolutely. I would agree that that's exactly what he's saying.
Right. Now, the argument can fail for any number of reasons. It doesn't have to be an appeal to ignorance. In other words, look, you could say the same thing about any scientific theory. Any scientific theory is an argument that tries to explain something that is unexplained. That doesn't make it an appeal to ignorance because you are looking to a piece of ignorance, a hole in our knowledge, and trying to answer it. It doesn't mean that the argument you're putting forward to answer that is an appeal to ignorance.
No, I'm going to disagree. You are postulating that one is actually in reality and the other one is in reality, and they're not the same thing.
Okay, well,
I mean, I understand where you're coming from, Ozzy, right? I fucking do. But you're trying to say that science and God are equal.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying
so then how can you use the argument?
I'm not using the argument. I'm an atheist. If I was persuaded by these arguments, I wouldn't be an atheist. I'd be a theist.
Yeah,
what I'm saying is he's just getting the fallacy wrong. He's just getting the fallacy wrong. The fact that people look to areas of mystery and then try to come up with an argument that will explain that mystery, that isn't an argument from ignorance. Okay, an argument from ignorance is when you appeal to ignorance and say, we don't know, therefore it must be this explanation.
No, but this is the point that Silverman's trying to make in his point. He's saying that the only go-to point is ignorance because you can't have anything else because there's no fucking evidence. And you're saying, well, we can do it with science. Yes, but that requires knowledge of said given event or method or whatever. You can't do that with God.
Look, it doesn't matter whether you can actually answer a question with God or not. Look, God might be an impossibility for all we know. Okay, the point is that Silverman's just wrong in the fallacy that he is referring to. He is simply telling people that what's wrong with these arguments is this particular fallacy, and they don't commit that particular fallacy. Okay, not when they're properly stated. There are people who will go around saying, "Where did the universe come from? You can't answer that, can you?" Well, then it must be God. Now that's an argument from ignorance. That is a God of the Gaps argument.
Sty, do you understand the point that Ozzy just made? And if you do, try to tell us what he said.
What Ozzy's saying is that you're not entitled to have a position of a philosophical point which disagrees with Ozzy. That's basically.
No, that's
well, that's very charitable.
Really?
I know that's not going to be very popular.
It's not a question of popular. It's supposed to be fucking incorrect.
It's supposed to be a good fucking joke, though, and people laugh. So
all right, it was a good joke.
With a straight face, then.
Let me ask you seriously: did you even hear him? Because it doesn't sound to me like you got his point.
I just disagree with what I agree. Look, me and Ozzy We've had
Look,
good
I just
conversations.
want to know if you understood his argument. I don't want to get
Yeah,
into.
I do, and I just disagree with them. I
Okay.
just
Okay.
That's fine.
Well,
That's
look,
fine.
it's not important that I persuade
It's
Steyer
not
or
a
any
big
particular
deal.
individual.
Yeah.
No.
So let's leave it there. I thought it was very intriguing and compelling what Ozzy just said. Personally, I totally get where he's coming from. Does anyone else, like James, did you hear what he said, and does it change your opinion about about Silverman's broad sweeping claim?
I completely, I understand his philosophical position, but my point is that not everybody understands a specific or a proper or a formal definition of the God of the Gaps. So had I heard about some of this stuff before, as I was coming out of my Christianity, I would have seen these as trying to stuff some philosophy into a place where we don't know something, and could easily have just said, well, they're just trying to fill in a gap, because there's no formal training. He's not appealing. Silverman has yet to appeal to a formal education in philosophy in any of this book.
Well, he doesn't need to do that. I mean, you don't need to do that, right? I mean,
can I just finish?
Sorry, yeah.
He's appealing to people who have a little bit of understanding, and they know what a term God of the Gaps means. Anybody can understand that they're trying to stick God somewhere he doesn't belong. That's, to me, in the most liberal sense of that phrase, is all he's trying to do with it. And his arguments are bad. I agree with you, Ozzy, that he's not trying to make good formal reasoning. He's trying to appeal to the people he's trying to address, and that's all he's trying to do.
Well, but then what he's doing then is he's appealing to the gullible
yes,
among non-believers,
I'm
right?
Disagree with you.
And considering that in that book and in that chapter, he's sort of alleging that all these people these theists have, is bad arguments, and here's how you dismantle them. Look, if you're going to go around saying that all these people have is bad arguments, and that they're falling for them because they're gullible, right? And here's the antidote. You better have the right antidote. Right?
Well,
you better not be peddling another fallacy of your own.
Oh, I agree. Like, I'm not saying I would ever go and tell somebody who has an understanding of these things that they're wrong, because I would look like a fool and an idiot, and that's not what I want to do. But if somebody's struggling with what all these things are, they have no idea the formal logic behind any of this stuff, I could have a discussion and say, this is basically what these are saying, and this is kind of why I think they're wrong. I don't need to get into formal logic and formal reasoning to do that with somebody who doesn't know what the argument themselves are. I don't know anybody who got saved using any of these arguments. Nobody that I know ever even heard of these things.
Yeah, but he's the one saying this is how you deal with them. He's not saying this is a way to deal with a very badly mangled, misunderstood argument that reduces to a God of the argument. He's saying this is how you can get rid of all these arguments. Like, in one fell swoop, there's this objection, the appeal to the God of the Gaps fallacy, right? That will just raise all of the arguments that are before you, just cut them right down, right? And that is arming people with false confidence. They're going to walk up to someone who actually knows these arguments, and they're going to get laughed at. They're not just going to fail to convince that person. They're going to look stupid in front of that person and anybody else who bothers to understand both people and what they're saying.
Yeah, but Ozzy, I'm not disagreeing with your point on that, on what you're saying. What I think he's trying to do is trying to educate people in, I guess what James said, in a very vague, shitty way, right? I'm not saying he's the smartest guy in the room, because I just said before, and I guess most people can testify to this, I don't agree with his approach. I'm an atheist, so why would I?
Next section, hang on, I was just going to jump to the next section of the book.
I was going to say, let's now discuss. Well, I want to, before you go to the complete next section, I want to.
It's still in this section. It's just it sums up what he's just talking about.
Okay, go ahead and do the summary, and then we'll move on to the ontological argument, because I would like for Ozzy to hear it.
Okay. Well, this is actually after that. So if you want to go to the ontological argument, I can save this.
Go on, Helena. Go to the ontological, Helena.
Why don't you read your passage, and I'm going to look through the book for his summary about the ontological argument.
Okay. Well, the ontological argument is on page 104, and I'm on page 106. Okay. This is what he writes. He says, every proof of God has something in common. None of them are actual proofs of any gods at all. They are all word games and logical fallacies. As I mentioned earlier, We as a species have a set of information we call facts. These are things we know. While we don't know everything, it would take real solid evidence to change our minds because we are extremely confident that we know, as opposed to what we suspect or think.
Well, sadly for the human race, that's not actually true. Sadly. I mean, I would love to embrace that notion of utopia, but sadly, that's not the case. Or we wouldn't kill each other over fucking stupid ideas.
Well, that's a whole other argument.
No, but it's actually so. Like what he says, I would love it to be the case, but sadly, that's a fallacy. Like I mean, that's the point. It's like I'm trying to point out the honesty of why I'm trying to understand Silverman. I mean, I've got nothing against the guy. I just
You don't even know who he is.
well,
Okay,
let's move on.
So that summary is strange. So that was just a summary of him explaining.
This is right after the ontological argument. It's beginning to end. It's the beginning of the end of this part of the chapter.
He's trying to really push the idea that Ozzy just debunked in one sentence, right?
Ozzy says nothing in one sentence, Helena.
Yeah,
he said that in one sentence.
It takes about 10 sentences.
All right, let me. I would like to go through this one last argument.
Yeah.
If it's okay with everybody else, I'm going to read. It's only 3 or 4 paragraphs. Is that all right with everyone?
Just fucking read it already.
All right.
Get on.
So, of all the so-called proofs of a God's existence, none is given more unearned credit than the ontological argument. It's a word game used by preachers to convince doubters within their flocks that God is real. Notice how I never said it's used for conversion, because I know no one who was ever changed in any way by this migraine-inducing mess. While all the thinkers in the atheist movement dismiss this argument as the game that it is, none that I've read have hit on the central point of why this argument doesn't work. So he has a secret central point. Let's find out. He says, here's the argument in a nutshell. Imagine a most perfect being. Either this perfect being exists or he doesn't. However, existence is greater than non-existence, so a perfect being that does not exist would not be a most perfect being. A perfect being must therefore exist as a simple facet of being perfect. Okay, then he goes, didn't it give you a headache? Here's how I disprove this argument. Imagine there are 2 identical people, person A and person B. They are exactly alike, except person A is an unrepentant axe murderer, and person B is not. Given only that information, which person is more perfect? As a decent human, you obviously said B is more perfect than A because B doesn't kill people. This is because responsibility matters.
No,
People who kill must be judged by that action, and in almost every society on Earth they are. This should be factored into the idea of perfection in this argument. Therefore, imagine now God A and God B. They are all powerful, perfect omniscient gods. And the only difference is that God A exists and God B does not. God A then is singularly responsible for all of the suffering on Earth ever. God A is responsible for every hungry child, every hurricane, blah, blah, blah. We get this, right? This is problem of evil. Okay, that is not canceled out by the good of our existence in the first place. Since God A could have created all of us without any pain or suffering, it must be assumed that he gave us suffering for some less than perfect reason. Creating a being that suffers its whole life is not a good thing, it's horrible. It's far worse when you consider it's not even necessary. It's an optional net negative, and the responsibility would sit squarely in the lap of the all-powerful deity who made it happen. God B, on the other hand, does not and never did exist. As such, he bears no responsibility for anything in the universe. Nobody can point to God B and accuse him of anything, because he didn't do anything.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, like, as someone who's like an atheist, that is the worst fucking thing I've ever had to listen to, ever.
But he's not addressing this to atheists, Stein.
No, he just
he's
basically.
Addressing this to atheists.
No. All right, shall I tell you what he just did? He's give you assumption X, assumption X, assumption X, and then led you down the garden fucking park or field or whatever you want to call it, and made you say, well, is there a God or isn't one? Is God bad or good? No, he's literally giving you information where your brain doesn't have a choice. That's how propaganda works. Do you understand
so for
do
me,
you understand
Hang
propaganda
on,
at this
Sly.
point?
Hang on.
okay, so for me, what he's trying to do here, he's agreeing that existence is an attribute, and he's trying to make a case that non-existence is better than existence because of responsibility.
No, but that's a false. That's false.
So I'd like to hear from Ozzy real quick, Sty, because Ozzy kind of has a handle on these arguments, and I'm sure he's got a lot to say about what just happened.
He probably does, but he's going to.
Okay, so let's let Ozzy talk now.
Okay, that was hard to follow because that was kind of some tortured reasoning in there.
Yep.
But okay, just let me try to go through it here. At the beginning, did he say that it was a word game? Because what was funny about this his debunking of it was at no point does he explain how it's a word game.
He didn't debunk anything. Oh, shit, sorry.
Yes, he does. He says it's a clever word game in the first paragraph.
Yeah, I seem to remember that. And no, so the whole time I was listening, I was expecting like at some point he's going to explain and unpack why it's a word game. So he in fact does have an argument here about why he thinks it's a bad argument, but this has nothing to do with it being a word game. But that is an oft-heard objection, counter-apologetic, that it's a word game. Now, I don't think it's a word game. I think actually something like Anselm's ontological argument is actually a very ingenious attempt at a proof of God. I think it's really clever and ingenious. I think it's wrong for a lot of reasons, but I mean it's not a word game. It's trying to analyze a concept. You have this concept, something than which no greater being can be conceived, and the idea is that concept, properly understood, would have to have the attribute of existence. And if it didn't have the attribute of existence, you would not have in fact succeeded in conceiving of the thing that you were asked to conceive of, which was something than which no greater thing could be conceived, right? So it doesn't matter how great this thing is that you imagine it. If you imagine it without the attribute or the quality or the trait or the property of existence, it wouldn't be the greatest thing, something than which no greater thing could be conceived. So the way to understand the ontological argument is as a challenge. I dare you, I challenge you to conceive of this thing, and you will see that properly conceived, it would have to have the attribute of existence, and if you were to deny that it had the attribute of existence, you would simply not be imagining the thing that I asked you to imagine. So the idea is it's an analysis of a concept. Here's a concept. I put forward a hypothetical concept. I ask you to explore this concept in full and work out the implications of what it would mean for something to be something than which no greater being could be conceived. And then you would see that it would have to have the attribute of existence. And if you were to deny the attribute of existence, you would not have met the challenge. So that's how the argument works. So that's sort of the old argument. There's a modern modal version of this that works slightly differently. But so that's the idea. Now, the thing with this argument though is that you can never sort of try to pick some other thing and then compare it. Gonolo, who was a contemporary of St. Anselm, tried it with a bridge. He said, I can imagine some bridge greater than which no greater bridge can be conceived. But that argument doesn't work. You can't prove the existence of a great bridge this way because it only works when the object that you're conceiving of is maximally great. It only works for the absolute limiting case, right? It's not going to work for anything that's circumscribed within existence. Now, I confess I got a little lost at the end when he was talking about responsibility because I was waiting for a word game. So Helena, could you just dial that back and reread that little bit about the moral responsibility part? Because I didn't see how that worked.
So yeah, what he's trying to get at eventually is that perfection itself is subjective. So what he's saying with this moral responsibility is that in his rendition of what is perfect, it includes a moral responsibility for the suffering on the planet.
Right.
And because a God that doesn't exist is more perfect in that it isn't responsible for all of the suffering on the earth. then a God that doesn't exist is more perfect than a God that does.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
but
if there's a God, sorry, somebody was trying to say something there.
Sorry, that was just me being a dick. It's just.
Oh.
I'm okay. I'm just lost in
Not you,
translation at this
Sty.
point. Yeah,
Well,
I
It's
know.
okay, Style. I found a little section here. He says, however, a perfect being would not be responsible for all the death and suffering in the world. But a God that exists, assuming he were all-powerful and omniscient, as this argument is positing, would definitely be large and... you know what? No, this is okay. Would definitely be large and in charge and bear 100% of the responsibility. Therefore, a more perfect God would not exist, because he would bear no responsibility at all.
Well, why couldn't a maximally great being bear the responsibility? I mean, that being would just need a morally sufficient reason for there to be suffering, right? You just have to posit that there is a morally sufficient reason for there to be the amount of suffering that it is. I mean, something like Leibniz's best of all possible worlds argument would work here, right? I mean, God could create a world that contains all kinds of suffering, such as the world that we exist in, and as long as it would be impossible for God to create a world with one tier less, okay? If God could only create a world that had, fewer tiers, but would somehow be offset by some evil, then he's compelled to create this world. So the idea is that this is the best of all conceivable, logically possible worlds. Of all the possible worlds God could have created, he could have created some where there'd be one child less that starves, okay? But if in that world, right, as a result of creating that world, some other greater harm or evil or suffering would result, then God would be obligated to create the world that has the child die that we would wish would not die. So the idea is it's a failure of imagination on our part. We have to imagine God as in a position of creating all these possible worlds, and then he has to choose the best one, the one that has the greatest amount of good against suffering, and then he is morally obligated and responsible to create that world. And if he created that world, then he is bearing the moral responsibility, and he remains maximally great because he couldn't have created a greater world. Now there are arguments against why. What's that?
Sorry. I was just going to say, yes, Silverman just assumes that, of course, God, being all-powerful and all-knowing, could have created a world where there was no suffering. And that's not the world that we have. Therefore, the God that doesn't exist is not.
No, it's just, this is blowing my fucking mind. Honestly, I know you guys are intelligent people, but you're missing the point. Everything in this conversation is based on assumptions. They're not actually real. They're what-ifs. I've just listened to my good friend Ozymandias say what if about 20 million times in one sentence. None of them predicate proof.
No one's arguing that. No, wait, hang on.
That's, my mind's blown at this point.
The ontological argument is just trying to show.
Okay, does ontological arguments prove therefore true?
No. The ontological argument seeks to prove that a God of a certain description has to exist by virtue of the concept. That is, if you understand this concept, you understand that existence is a necessary property.
Yep,
now, let me tell you, there are great arguments against why that doesn't follow, right? Why you wouldn't have to have the property of existence, okay? But that is, if you can imagine something. See, what he's trying to do is say, listen, I can imagine something greater than God that wouldn't. I mean, he's trying to imagine something greater than the traditional God, right? But the problem with the moral responsibility thing is, I mean, there's all kinds of problems with this moral responsibility thing. I mean, under some conceptions of God, God doesn't have moral obligations and duties. We have moral obligations and duties, right?
Exactly. So therefore, why would you think?
Therefore, God can never be held morally accountable. He's accountable to no one.
No, but therefore, then why would people use logic in order to try and define what a God is? God doesn't have to be logical. Humans are logical.
Well, no, but
right. So Sty, I see your point, and I want to continue because what Silverman's next point is related to what both you and Ozzy are saying. And Silverman's sort of bigger point is this. I'm going to read it. In truth, the ontological argument fails because perfection is subjective. My perfect God includes responsibility for evil. Others would differ. But in either case, it's a subjective definition of an objective sounding word. There's the trick. There can't be a most perfect being any more than there can be a most beautiful person. Perfection is in the eye of the debater, and in my opinion, any being that willfully causes all the pain and suffering on this planet for all living beings throughout history is not perfect.
Well, there's a good objection there's a good objection there when you say, wait a minute, the concept of perfection here, right, of something greater than which. I mean, the concept of greatness has to be unpacked, and unless you have some kind of rigorous concept of greatness here,
you have to define what greatness is.
You're not going to be able to say, you're not going to be able to analyze the concept something than which no greater being can be conceived unless you understand what greatness is. My wife has a wonderful sort of argument along these lines, a wonderful counter. She says, yes, I mean, if you consider what a maximally great being would be, it would be all powerful, it would be all knowing, it would be omnibenevolent, it would be eternal, and it would be chocolatey.
But this is the thing that I love about Noam Chomsky. I love this about Noam Chomsky. He's one of my favorite people, more than Mr. Silverman, sadly. Noam Chomsky literally points out who's one of the grandfathers or the father of linguistics. It's impossible for you to equate a god because you don't even know what one is.
That's what the ontological argument is an attempt to unpack what it would mean for something to be a god. It would be something than which no greater being could be conceived. This would be, listen, it properly understood this concept properly understood according to proponents of this argument, right? This would be the ultimate object of worship. Nothing could be more worthy of worship than this maximally great being.
So, Ozzy, how do people who put this argument forward deal with the fact that really it is so subjective about perfection?
Well, what they try to do is they try to give more objective criteria that we would probably want to agree with. That is, they would try to explain what a great-making property is. What properties are great-making? Make something great, right?
Pro-life.
And of course, that's hard to do, but that's what they try to do. They try to explain, they try to unpack the notion of a great-making property and appeal to things that we would say, yeah, that would be a great-making property. Having more power,
Silverman
having
says,
more knowledge, being morally good.
Silverman says causing zero suffering is a great-making.
It's not. I mean, it's causing no unnecessary suffering would be a great-making property. Listen, I cause suffering all the time. Doctors cause suffering all the time, right?
Yeah, but if they didn't have to, that would be better.
Right. It's unnecessary suffering.
Necessarily, in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily need to be narrowed down to necessary suffering. From Silverman's point of view, it can just be all suffering, any suffering. It certainly seems like that would be great making.
Well,
zero suffering for any reason. That would be great.
No, but that's assuming that God can create a world that would be good, that had no suffering, right? It's possible that God can only create a world. Look, God might be able to create a. Yeah, exactly. God might be able to create a world where there's no suffering, but that might be a world of hydrogen atoms and no sentient beings.
But he didn't.
Right?
That's possible.
Right. So, which would be the greater world? A world where there's only hydrogen particles, right? Or a world such as our own, where there is suffering, but there is also everything that we enjoy, right? Which world do you think is the better world, right?
The one where
I think Silverman might say it doesn't have to come down to hydrogen or everybody's suffering.
No, it doesn't have to come down. No, it's not a stark
choice.
It's not a stark choice. But the point is this: as soon as you admit that there are better universes to exist in, there are better universes that could be, right? Yeah. The world of just hydrogen particles and the world that we live in. To admit that if a person is willing to admit that one is a greater world than the other, then then all of a sudden you can say, wait a minute, now things can lie along a continuum, and I can now imagine other possible worlds in between these two stark choices, okay? And now what must a good God do? What must a maximally good God do, or maximally great God do? He would have to create the best of all possible worlds that could be created. God obviously can't create worlds that he can't create. He can only create the worlds that are logically possible, right? So that's why I gave the example of the degenerate world with only hydrogen particles.
Well, that's not technically true, because if you invoke the word God, God is implicit in this in regards to what you just said, because God can do anything.
Well, no.
Okay, then do you
God
think
can do anything possible? Look, omnipotence, concept of omnipotence can do anything with power. You can't do anything that can't be done, right? I mean, so there are some concepts of omnipotence, okay, are such that they're restricted to logical possibilities. God can only do that which is logically possible. Okay.
And do you think that's true?
And yeah, I'd like to think that if there was a God, it could only do that which is logically possible.
So
but there's an older notion. There's an older notion of omnipotence that said that God could actually do the impossible. He could actually perform contradictions. We are bound by logic. He is not. Right. This was called the doctrine of created eternal verities. And incidentally, the ontological argument was not created to refute atheism. There weren't lots of atheists running around in the 11th century.
Yes, I know, but I'm asking you personally.
No, but hang on. I just want to finish the point. The Anselm came up with the argument because there was in his day this doctrine of created eternal verities that said that God could do the impossible. He could literally carry out contradictions, right? Including he could exist and not exist, and this was unthinkable to some theologians such as Anselm, and so that's why an ontological proof of God was offered. There were plenty of proofs of God on offer that were accepted in the day. The ontological argument was offered to provide a proof that made God ontologically and metaphysically necessary.
Because it's annoying. Can you just stop saying the word proof?
Look.
It's a proof, Sty.
A proof is just an attempt at a proof.
Because it's deductive.
No. What he's saying is there's an idea of what a God concept is. He knows very well where I stand, and so do
All right,
you.
let's let Ozzy explain why proof is appropriate.
Well, look, when we are discussing a proof, we are discussing an attempt at a proof. That's all we mean. When we say Aquinas' 5 proofs of God, right? All we mean is these are Aquinas' 5 attempts at a proof. Aquinas thought that they were proofs. Many people have thought they were proofs. When we discuss a proof of God, we are discussing an attempt at a proof. Right? So, it's up to us to determine whether or not it was a proof or not. We don't get to say that something is. We don't get to discuss something as a proof only if we can already establish that it's a proof, right?
No, but in regards to this conversation, is it true?
What do you? Is what true?
Well,
a proof doesn't even have to be true unless you.
No, but what I'm saying is, in this regard of this concept of this conversation and what we're trying to discuss, if we're gonna ask Mr. Silverman his opinion, which we're discussing right now, if he holds an opinion, right, you can say, well, that's proof because he has an experience, right? But that doesn't say whether it's true or false, does it? It just says this is his opinion.
Well, look, I mean, where Silverman is right in this is in pointing out that the ontological argument is very often not fully fleshed out. That is, the concept of perfection, the concept of best, the concept of great-making property is not articulated sufficiently. And where it is articulated, very often it seems kind of arbitrary. Like, oh, really? You're saying that
I'll agree with that.
Existing eternally is a great-making property? What's so great about existing eternally? Is that really better than having a finite existence? Right? Supposing something exists eternally.
We don't even know if either or are true.
Yeah, exactly. You could always challenge whether or not something is a great making property, right? So I mean, that is in fact a good objection. If you can show that, hey, wait a minute, you haven't said what a great making property is, or yes, you have said what a great making property is, but you're not giving me a good reason for accepting that is a great making property, right? I could challenge it. Maybe chocolatiness is a great making property, as my wife insists, right? Or maybe it's not, okay? Maybe living infinitely, maybe being omnipresent is a great making property. Honestly, being omnipresent doesn't strike me as a great making property. It's kind of an interesting property to conceive of, but I don't think it's great making. And it might even be incoherent, okay? In which case it's a devastating property, not a great making property. So I mean, that is a good objection. He's onto something there. That I think that is a proper objection to raise. And there are other objections that can be raised. Kant raised a really notable objection in that existence isn't a property like redness or crispiness or fragility or something. I mean, we predicate, we attribute properties or traits to things all the time. I say the cup is brittle, the cup is brown, the cup is light. You know, I can slap on all these attributes or characteristics onto something. Okay, but whenever you do that, you are always presupposing that the cup exists. You don't have to say, oh, and by the way, the cup has this property of existence. What would a cup be if it didn't have the cup of existence? It didn't have the property of existence. What does it mean to say that something has being, as opposed to what, right? So I mean, when I posit a unicorn doesn't exist. But when I talk about a unicorn, I'm imagining it as existing, right? If I say imagine a white unicorn, now imagine a white unicorn existing. What's the difference between those two things? There's nothing, right? Existence isn't an ordinary predicate, right? And you cannot simply imagine this something than which no greater being can be conceived without imagining it as existing. But that doesn't mean that therefore it does exist, right? So existence is not an ordinary predicate where you can assume that the entity in question has to exist just because you can conceive of it and conceive of it as existing. Whenever you conceive of something, you are conceiving of its existence, right? Whenever you're conceiving of something that is supposed to be a feature of reality, you are implicitly imagining, conceiving of it as existing.
Except for triangles, of course.
And even triangles, I think we conceive of as existing.
Well, I'm gonna slightly, I'm gonna agree.
That doesn't mean they do exist, right?
No, hold on, wait.
Right?
No, but this is the point, right? I'm gonna agree with 90% of what you said, but in regards to the whole conceiving of stuff and being no, conceptions and ideas are not. I would say personally, and this is just my opinion. You know, you're fully entitled to disagree. Are not the same as like.
Obviously, it's just your opinion.
Yeah, well, of course it's my opinion, but I'm just trying to contribute to what he said. I literally just said I agree with 90% of what he just said, which I do. But when it comes to, well, therefore unicorns, this goes back to exactly what Helena was reading about what he just said. You know, if 90% of humans go, therefore God, or whatever, God of the gaps, if you want to put it in that terminology, or whatever, does that make God true? Really?
I mean, that's sure. I get that. Now, what I'd like to do is move on to the very last section, because I don't want this to go on forever. And if we just cover this last section briefly, then we can get into some of these, you know, meaty arguments, and sort of be done with the Silverman and get into sort of the other arguments, like whether or not existence is a property and stuff like that. So I think his very last point, I'm not so sure what the point of it was, and I've been pretty good about figuring out where he's going with all the other sections, but this very last section seems to me sort of a science works, bitches, kind of ending, right? He talks about evolution. He talks about how you know, theists who want to stay current have this problem to deal with evolution and the fact that it means Adam and Eve. I guess he's talking specifically about Christians. You know, couldn't have existed and that kind of thing. And then he says so. And then he sort of transitions in a way I can't quite figure out. His main point is, so sometimes you'll get a theist who wants to attack science itself, who wants to attack the scientific method, who wants to attack scientific methodology itself. And then it just sort of ends, and he moves to the next chapter. So, James, I think maybe you probably have a better handle on that little section than I do. So maybe you could kind of explain your perception of it, and then we could move on from there, and then we can sort of take it wild.
Okay. My understanding of the last, I find it rather interesting that he opens talking about Stockholm syndrome. I've actually used that analogy for what some believers feel or how they felt when they were in there. So it's quite interesting that he starts out with that. Then he moves into talking about, like I was talking about earlier, about literalists, fundamentalists, who the book needs to be literal for it to be true. He's addressing here mostly young Earth creationists and the like, who have to deny that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old and the universe is 13 point whatever billion years old.
7.
Yeah, and they have to hold to a literal reading that, Adam, we had Adam and Eve, and, God made Adam out of clay, and, the first story says that God took a rib and made Eve, and then the second story, anyway, it's just a mess. There's two creation stories, and we're supposed to believe that they're, not different, but they're exactly the same, because, just ridiculous what they have to go through to accept the literalness of their Bible. So he spends a lot of time talking about just the basics understanding of the science that we know today disproves so many things that the Bible has claimed over the time it's existed. And I spend dizzying amount of hours listening to apologists explain, well, the Earth really, the Bible, the Old Testament doesn't really say that the Earth is flat. It says it's a round sphere, or whatever word they want to use to make it sound like science is agreeing with what the Bible says. They have to distort either the science or they have to distort the book to make it fit what we are understanding science to tell us right now. So everything else is, he just goes from, he refers to Krauss explaining a universe from nothing, talks about some of the various religious people who have worked so hard at, the Catholic Church acknowledges that evolution happens. Pat Robertson, he's absolutely batshit crazy on most things, but he admits that, the science is, you can't disprove the science. Evolution is a fact. Get over it. So you've got the Ken Hams, and you've got the Ray Comforts, and then you've got the liberals and the moderates making everything try to make sense or ignoring what the Bible says when it disagrees with science. Like you've got guys like Ken Miller, complete evolutionist. He's a Catholic. Francis Crick Collins, the genome guy, the guy who pioneered health, led the team as an evangelical. Yet he knows that the DNA takes us back hundreds of thousands of years. So he's talking about the dissonance that they have to live to hold on to their religious beliefs in the face of the mounting and overwhelming evidence that science offers us. So he says hating the scientific method is hating learning. And this is true. You see a lot of regressive thinking, in the U.S. happening as they have to hold fast to what they believe a literal translation of the Bible says. Those who oppose science via the scientific method seek not to find the answer, but to find a way to justify their incorrectness. Failing that, as they will every single time, they demonize science itself, choosing to label science anti-religion, which betrays the complete ignorance of a basic fact. Science is not atheistic by choice or practice. Science is only in line with atheism because science has never found any proof of a God. If science ever finds a proof of a God, it will immediately become the antithesis of atheism. Science is anti-religion in the same way it is anti-flat earth, anti-geocentrism. Those things are wrong. Should atheism ever be proven wrong, it will be proven so by science. And I'm not holding my breath. That's how the chapter ends. So, welcome back, Helena. So I just kind of summarized that part of the chapter in a couple of minutes here. Thoughts? Anybody?
Well, there was a lot there that I would agree with. This sort of ties in with what we were talking about before. A lot of apologetics involves looking to mysteries. science is sort of closing off a lot of mysteries. It's answering a lot of questions. It's filling in the holes in our knowledge. And so where are you going to locate God? Well, you're not going to locate it where we've already got answers, because that obviates the need to appeal to God. So let's look for areas, pockets of ignorance, and then see if we can come up with an argument, like a real argument, not an appeal to ignorance, but an actual argument in that pocket of ignorance for God. So I think that because those holes are shrinking, they're becoming fewer in number and smaller all the time, people recognize that science is not their friend, and that the arguments for their God are in retreat, that there are fewer opportunities to point to God. So I think that does set science up as an enemy for a lot of theists, and a lot of them just give up. They despair, and they just say, so much for science, so much for climate science, so much for evolutionary science, so much for cosmology, so much for physics and radiometric dating. And a lot of people at first will try cafeteria style to keep the science that is not inconsistent with their theology, and reject only the bits of science that are inconsistent with their theology. But then invariably, I think as people figure out that you can't just pick and choose the science that you don't like. You can't just say radiometric dating doesn't work, because it turns out that huge swaths of physics disappear if that's the case, right? It's a miracle that radiometric dating works at all, unless the physics is right, right? Our physics has to be more or less right for radiometric dating to work at all. You wouldn't be able to carbon date the Turin Shroud or any piece of papyrus, right? I mean, when they want to say, oh, look, we found a piece of papyrus that dates back to the 3rd century, and it has, it's a fragment of the gospel, they're very happy to rely on radiometric dating there, right? They can only countenance the science is working to the degree that it does if they countenance that the science behind it, the physics and the chemistry behind it, is correct. And so some will go one of two ways. They will just say, well, I guess the science is okay. I'll have to reinterpret my text accordingly so that it conforms to the science. Or they go the other way. They bite the bullet and they say, to hell with science. And they just become kind of nihilistic about science, and they become flat earthers and such. So I think that does happen. They become genuine enemies of science and modernity that way. And that I find really worrisome. But in a way, I like it. I like it when I hear that fundamentalism is becoming more strident, more crazed, more uncoupled from scientific reality that we're discovering. Because they marginalize themselves. They look quainter and quainter and quainter. They become harder and harder to take seriously. They become a little bit more dangerous politically. I mean, it's worrisome to have people who are scientifically ignorant and have contempt for science in public office. But they really are marginalizing themselves, and I think that's a win for us.
I agree.
I'm not so sure it's true, though. Because, I mean, look at Trump, look at Texas, look at what's happening to our textbooks. Look at how California had to, reiterate that it didn't want any of the Texas textbooks. Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure that they're all that marginalized. I mean, I think eventually they will be.
Well, that's what I mean in the long
something
run.
About America, right? There's something about America and I think it's onto something that it's how it's mingled with politics.
You're talking to 3 Canadians and a Brit, right?
But yeah, but not even America can deny reality forever. Nobody can deny reality forever. Sooner or later, once we come to understand what reality is, it will take over. It just may take longer in America. That's all. I mean.
Yeah, it's possible. It's just interesting. So Trump is a great example because he himself is so not religious, and yet he's got all of this fundamentalist support or evangelical support.
Well, that I think doesn't have that much to do with religion. That has to do with this kind of unholy fusion of neoconservative political and social values with the religious right. This is something that started in the 80s with things like the moral majority movement and stuff like that, where it was a deliberate attempt by the Republican Party to own the religious right, because they know that these people vote as a bloc. Once we've got them, we can get a lock on them on certain key issues like abortion. And so now a lot of people who used to be just evangelicals religiously are now evangelical about conservatism, and so I think that's what's gone on there. So that's kind of a weird thing. So now what you have are people who self-identify as religious, therefore they have to be conservative. Trump comes along and sounds like an arch-conservative, although he's not a conservative and he's not religious. I mean, this is, I mean, you just have to look back at some old videos and interviews with Trump, and he's espousing all kinds of completely liberal, almost libertarian values on everything about sex and homosexuality and abortion and drug use. He was as far away from the right as he could, but now he's identifying himself. He's talking the talk, and so, well, this is our guy. This is our guy on the right, and so.
Well, but are the so-called religious right-wingers even truly in his camp? I don't hear an awful lot of noise from them. The people that I hear who support Trump are the people who have a fundamental mistrust of the institutions that they've been taught that are going to help them, and that doesn't. I mean, that might bring them into certain certain conjunctions with the faith-based voting bloc in one or two instances, but I just don't hear them. I don't hear the religious right giving full-throated support to Trump.
No, they don't. They would much rather have someone like Ted Cruz. But I mean, if it's going to be Trump, they'll go with Trump. Why? Because he's now talking like some kind of almost mad Republican, right? So that's perfect for them. Well, it's not perfect for them, but I mean, it suits them because they have associated their religious values with conservative political values, free markets and things like that. I mean, it's hard to imagine that someone like Jimmy Carter, okay, was an evangelical, right? Is a Southern Baptist, right? I mean, he has repudiated that name of evangelical and Southern Baptist because it's become a right-wing movement, and he was a left-wing. I mean, there were left-wing evangelicals. I mean, in Canada, we have someone like Tommy Douglas who spearheaded our socialized healthcare system in Saskatchewan, and that was then implemented across Canada later on. He was a minister. He was a Baptist minister. That was a left-wing, populist, evangelical religious movement that championed socialized healthcare in our country. I mean, that's unthinkable in the States now because of this unholy union with right-wing conservative values, right? But there's nothing inherent in Christianity with an evangelicalism that makes it right-wing, right? That makes it a proponent of unbridled capitalism and an enemy of any socialized programs. I mean, that's a weird artifact of American political history in the last few decades.
Anything you refer to about that system, a system of government of anything, you've got Jesus being the ultimate socialist. Sell everything you have and give it all away. People who need it. That's never going to fly.
Yeah, I mean, there are people out there who are Christians who think that Jesus was a kind of communist, right?
Of course they do, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost unthinkable now among evangelicals, right?
Yeah. Well, they would never go for that, not after 35 years of prosperity teaching.
Yeah, now we have supply-side Jesus, right?
Yep.
Trickle-down Jesus, right? Well, I didn't coin that. That's.
Yeah, I've heard that before too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I grew up. Part of some of the churches I went to were Schambach and Oral Roberts, name it, claim it guys. And, that was a huge thing in the 80s and 90s. Wealth and prosperity. That's why you get Joel Osteen owning a $10 million house and worth $50 million or whatever the heck his net worth is because these guys don't understand what it actually means because it's an antithesis to everything they've been taught so far. So, I mean, that's a real problem. and you've got people blindly giving them money every Sunday. It's just scary. But that's a whole other issue.
I'm curious what other people in the Hangout think about what Silverman had to say about science and the religious.
Well, I mean, yeah. One of the reasons I haven't said anything so far is that you're right. I mean, and he's right, and you know, it is scary because left unchecked, we'd still be in the dark ages. So, but I don't like one of the reasons that I believe that people like Silverman need to be around and their methods need to be used is that there is such, I mean, people every week are going to places where they're being told that science is not as important as a Bronze Age survival manual. And, you know, the drum that beats longest is the beat we remember best, right? And so the only way that you're gonna go after that, because David Silverman doesn't have a church, so the only way that he's going to be able to counter that is through the dissonance of the clanging cymbal. And the cymbal doesn't need to be necessarily played with the best of art. It just needs to be able to, for a couple of minutes, shake people out of the doldrum of that drum beat. Because otherwise, I mean, it's just going to be ignorance that builds on top of ignorance, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, that's sort of what I worry about Silverman, is ignorance building on ignorance, or ignorance being countered by ignorance. I don't have a problem with his brashness and the fact that he's obnoxious and that he simplifies things, right? I mean, you know, nuance is not my favorite word, right? But you at least want to be accurate, right? And the problem I have with Silverman is that he is inaccurate. So some of his objections to apologetics are just misguided. They're just wrong. These are just, you're naming the wrong fallacy here, okay? And so you're not arming people with a good counter. You're arming them with a bad counter. That's a mistake. You're making people think that they think. Right? I mean, there's a saying, right, that if you make people think, they will hate you, but if you make people think they're thinking, they will love you. And I think that's what he's doing. He's making a lot of atheists think that they're thinking, that they really have penetrating objections to certain arguments, and that I think is a mistake. He's going to get a lot of love and you know, pats on the back for that, but I don't think he's doing anybody any favors there. But I do like the fact that he goes out there, that he wears an atheist T-shirt and has an atheist license plate, and then he goes on these shows and he'll bark back at people. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, activism is activism. It's in your face, and it has to be. And he draws a lot of fire. But what I don't like is that when he uses not arguments that are unsubtle, but arguments that are in fact wrong. And the other thing I don't like is when he's uncharitable and he maligns people and calls them liars. Right? That I think is a terrible mistake. Then he's living up to the stereotype of atheists being unscrupulous and dishonest and untrustworthy and stuff like that. I mean, if I was a religious person, I would look at David Silverman and think, boy, that guy really is willing to say anything about me. I mean, he's willing to call me a liar. He doesn't, because I'm uttering what is, by his lights, a falsehood, he calls me a liar, right? Not mistaken, not deluded, right? But a liar, right? That I think hurts us. That I think is a mistake. So it seems to me he can do everything that he's doing. He can simplify his message, and he can repeat it, and he can package it in slogans, and he can be obnoxious and draw the heat and stir the pot. He can do all of that without the inaccuracy and without the vilification of the religious, right? That worries me, because that, you know, we've seen, especially in an American context, the dangers of vilification, and especially with sort of simple populist or appeals to populism. That I think is sort of a dangerous kind of formula, right?
Well, I think the vilification of the religious actually serves as a very useful mirror of what has been done for years to the atheists, which is the vilification of them. I think one of the things that it does is it sort of forces people to go, wait, what? We're villains? Why does he think we're villains? And then if they're of course, that's going to be sitting right beside the reasons that he thinks they're villains. And anybody, how do I put this? I think that these people will not be able to avoid the fact that their vilification, the vilification of the religious, is almost a direct mirror of the opposite. And I think that's useful. I think it's useful to show certain aspects of the religious right in their own face.
Yeah, I think holding up a mirror to ugliness is a good idea, but I don't think that the way to do that is to be ugly in the same ways. That I think is a mistake. I think that just arms people. That lends justification to people's vilification of you.
These people don't need an excuse to think poorly of us. They already do. They already think that we're liars. Honestly,
well,
I mean that's not, I am willing to forgive the fact that he is periodically wrong because his big shapes are correct. And I think that especially with people like you out there, to sort of in venues where you have the time and you have the room to move your elbows, to sort of step in and say, look, even though this is what he said, that was sort of introductory to reality. Kind of like when I was in 10th grade, my science teacher told me, look, there are some things I have to teach you that aren't precisely true, simply because I don't have the time to go all the way up the chain and teach you everything. So I have to teach you these sort of pinching off facts, so that we can move on to other aspects of the curriculum. And then later on, when you go up into higher learning, you can have this more unpacked for you, and we can teach you what exactly is going on, right? So I can forgive that, because he's not doing this in a vacuum. He's simply one part of the army, as it were.
Yeah, I guess I see this as sort of a war of ideas, and a war of ideas is fought on a lot of fronts, and you use a lot of different weaponry, right? So I don't mind that there are sort of firebrands out there, the R and Raws and stuff like that, It's just that I feel a responsibility to tell those who care, wait, some of these arguments are not good arguments, and they're going to blow up in your face, and we're going to be made to look foolish, or we're going to end up looking like we don't have a respect and regard for the truth and facts and evidence, while going around insisting that we do. Then we look kind of ridiculous. So that's my concern, right? That for anybody who does care about these things, who cares more about just getting a win for atheism, for people who care beyond that, I and others think that you have to sort of serve as a corrective when he's saying things wrong. I mean, I think we have a responsibility to point out when those on our side are getting things wrong. So that's why I've been stepping into this. But I mean, I wouldn't want to be construed as thinking that what he's doing isn't important, and that his methods aren't right. That is, his style is wrong. His style is exactly right. Right? The shit-disturbing style that he has is exactly right. These billboards that infuriate so many people are exactly right. Monuments to Lucifer are exactly right. Right? God is not great, as the title of a book, is exactly right. It's just I'm worried about vilification. Someone like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, I mean, they have nothing against ridiculing bad ideas, but they don't call people liars. They don't malign them. They don't vilify people. I mean, they might vilify a specific individual, for instance, but they don't sort of vilify the religious as a whole. And that's what I object to about Silverman. It seems to me that the new atheism exploded onto the scene in the span of a few short years with a handful of books, and it raised the conversational level, and it caused conversations to happen all over the place. And those four horsemen that I just named there, they managed to do it without calling everybody a liar and putting forward, transparently bad arguments.
Yeah, but they caught the religious world by surprise, though. I mean, David Silverman is operating in a world like this. This came in any war. Attacks come in waves, right? So the four horsemen caught the religious world by surprise. But they responded, and they came hammering back with all sorts of stuff that a lot of it is really, a lot of it is sort of really forceful and really rocked a lot of the more cogent, a lot of the more thought-oriented people on the religious side back on their heels. David Silverman is in the second wave now. He's got to go back, and he's got to go back and push the boundaries of where everyone else can operate further outwards. And so I'm not. I have a funny feel like Christopher Hitchens in particular. He's not been how do I put this? It is not unknown for him from time to time to play fast and loose with reality. Now he's never really crossed the line, but he's gotten awfully darn close a few times. And I mean, a lot of these guys will engage in polemic if it suits them. So I have a difficulty believing that if their positions were reversed, that they wouldn't, in essence, sort of go, you know what, the absolute rectitude of this argument is not necessarily as important as the fact that I'm shaking people up and ripping a hole open for someone like Ozzy to come along and put a correct argument in. He's just there to blast the rock. That's all he's there for. It's up to the rest of you guys to sort of pick through the rock and say, all right, well, that goes here and that goes there, and let's organize this.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little worried about collateral damage. I want to correct myself if I may, though. I said that the Four Horsemen don't have like manifestly bad arguments. That's incorrect. Christopher Hitchens had some absolutely terrible arguments. In fact, most of his arguments against God were, God is crap. He's terrible. Therefore he doesn't exist. That is a terrible argument. And
Dawkins's arguments are not that good either. And in retrospect, now that several years have gone by, people are picking apart their actual arguments, but their impact, I think, was really important.
Yeah. I mean, it's an unfortunate fact that you can win a political war with bad arguments, right? And sometimes manifestly bad arguments, as long as the argument is easily repeated, sorts well with your intuitions. I mean, it's sort of a fact about psychology that when most of us don't look for evidence, right? We all have this tendency, right? All of us, right? We sort of think in terms of, may I believe this, when it's something we want to believe, right? May I believe this? And then as soon as you find an argument that permits you to believe something, you go, yes, I may believe this. Good. Stop thinking. Right? And if it's an argument, if it's a conclusion you don't like, then you ask yourself, must I believe this? Oh, no, I found a reason why I don't have to believe it. Oh, good. I'll stop thinking right there. You stop weighing arguments back and forth either way. It's always, may I believe this? Yes, good. Stop. Must I believe this? No, good. Stop. And that's how we think, right?
I just had a thought that this reminds me a little bit of the store, right? The store that will put out like that or someone who manufactures a product will advertise that the product has certain attributes and can do certain things, and when you actually go around to buying it, you may find that, well, it's not exactly as advertised, but we permit sort of a degree of puffery and a degree of flamboyance just to get people in the tent, and then once they're in there, they discover, it's kind of like the loss leader, I guess. I guess David Silverman is kind of like the loss leader of the atheist movement. I mean, he's like a cheap pair of socks, and then you go to the store for the cheap pair of socks, and it's like, well, once they're there, hey, why don't you buy this lovely shirt? Why don't you buy, like, I think it all works together more than I think it functions toward the purpose more than it functions away from the purpose. It is really too bad that David can't get his head and his ass completely in gear and do his thing on Fox News, right? But at the very least, we do have people like Ozzy and people like that who can sort of go, okay, now that you've fallen off of the wagon, let me help you out here a little bit so that you can sort of go A plus B equals C a little bit better. Now that Dave has kicked your head off the wagon.
Well, let me say one thing about that. Arguments for God's existence and arguments against God's existence, I don't think change people's minds about God's existence very much at all. Right? I think people have quite different kinds of motivations and reasons why they believe and why they don't believe. So I don't know if you noticed, but I don't burn a lot of energy trying to talk people out of their religion using counter-apologetics, right? I'm just trying to sort of, for people who are interested in these conversations, I'm trying to do my little bit to get people to, disabuse themselves of bad arguments and embrace better ones and stuff like that. But you never see me in a hangout trying to talk anybody out of their religion, right? Not that I've never tried to do that, but not in hangouts or anything like that. Like in real life, when I know somebody, I'm happy to try to get them to question what they believe explicitly with a view to getting them to abandon what I see as a falsehood that they're embracing that I think is going to hurt them in the long run. So.
No, but I think you do more for counter apologetics than someone who simply starts with, "I don't think God exists."
Sure,
sure. I think and don't kid yourself. I mean, if anybody ever asks you directly, "Do you think God exists?" you say no. So the minute that you start with that, and then you give a whole bunch of really cogent reasons why it's unlikely that he does, you're a counter apologist. Now you may not fly the banner, but you fulfill the role. It's just that because you tend to think and speak in paragraphs and manuscripts at a time, people, and you don't tend to repeat yourself, people usually don't get to hear "oh no, by the way, I don't believe in God." But every time you open your mouth and give a reasoned argument against the many fallacious arguments held by theists, you are de facto a counter-apologist.
No, I agree. I am a counter-apologist, right? I don't see myself. I don't identify myself. Okay, I don't identify myself as an anti-theist because it carries connotations that I think are well-earned connotations. But I am, under some descriptions, an anti-theist. That is, I don't just think religions are incorrect. I think they're bad. Okay. And I don't go around calling myself an atheist activist, but there's a certain sense in which, of course, I am. Look what my channel is devoted to. Look what my Google Plus contributions are for. Look at my Facebook page, right? Why am I on the Magic Sandwich Show and things like that, right? I mean, clearly, I am acting in service of unmarginalizing atheism. I'm trying to legitimize atheism, okay? But I don't sort of I don't go around calling myself that because I think that there's bigger fish. I'm after bigger game, right? Dogmatism and superstition are the enemies, not theism specifically. And the solution, the antidote to theism, isn't atheism. It's rationality and critical thinking and skepticism and embracing scientific values. That, I think, is the goal. That's what I try to push for. I'll tell you what I really like about Silverman, though, is this. Because he goes around calling himself an atheist, and he's an in-your-face atheist, okay, it forces people to confront the fact of our incredulity. Right, and I think I do this too, but I'm kind of, just by disposition, I'm kind of mild-mannered and soft-spoken, right? He's not, okay? But I'm doing it the way it comes naturally to me. He's doing it the way it comes naturally to him, which is you need to confront our incredulity. It's easy for you to have stereotypes about us as long as you think we don't exist. But as long as you can see us, as long as you confront our incredulity, you find out that, no, I don't believe your religion. I think it's false. I'm not, it's okay for you, it's okay. No. I think it's false and I think it's bad, right? He and I do it very, very differently, but I think that's more to do with disposition than conscious strategy. I suspect that this is his strategy because I think this is his disposition. Just as this is my strategy, this is my disposition. You don't think so, Helena?
I don't think that's not. I mean, I agree that it is his disposition. Like but he chose that because it's his disposition. But I don't think that that's I think that he has reasons and that they're tactical. But this is something that the rest of this book will help us sort of unpack, right? Because it could be the way you say, it could be the way I say, and he can't tell us because that would sort of reveal tactics and strategies and what have you. But I think when he talked about Overton, the Overton window, and he made that little sentence about how you have to say things you don't really believe because the idea is to push the window or yank the window. That to me made me think that this is tactical. This is not just, this is the kind of way he is. That he's made some decisions to say things he may not even hold for the sake of the greater good. Right?
Yeah, that's the no, whole idea of a noble lie. I have to say, it gives me the creeps. That really worries me. That makes me not want to trust anything else that a person is saying. So, I mean, if he wanted to be tactical, he shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, well, it could have been a little.
A lie, in my opinion, shouldn't be judged based on how badly it deviates from the truth, but should rather be judged on how much damage it does. And I'm not so sure that when it all comes out in the wash, I'm not so sure that the so-called lies that David Silverman may mouth are that damaging in the long run.
Well, he's someone who uses the word lies an awful lot, and he never uses it except disparagingly when he's talking about other people's lies. I think he doesn't like being lied to, and he would not like to be told lies, to save his soul. I mean, it's one of the things we all can't stand. We can't stand those of us who were religious and have sort of fallen out of our religiosity. We have a tendency to be hard on the people that indoctrinated us, even if they did it with the best of intentions, because we feel we got duped, right? And so it sort of feels as if someone played you, right? And everyone hates to be played. No one wants to be lied to, even if it's for your own good when the other person knew it was a lie. It has to be genuinely for your own good, and they have to be in a position to know that it's for your own good and that you would have been worse off without it. Right? This isn't like lying to you about, oh yeah, we're just going over here to because I need to do this, but in fact I'm just stalling. I'm just trying to keep you away from your house because there's a surprise birthday party waiting at your house, and I'm just trying to stall, right? I mean, there are lies and there are lies, and when people tell you, if someone sort of is promulgating bad counter-apologetics or something like that, and telling you that they're good counter-apologetics, and if they know that those are bad counter-apologetics, they're not doing you any favors. Those people are not your friends, right? Those people are using you to attain their political objectives, and that is a kind of political cynicism that worries me.
If you believe that religion is ultimately and all of the things that come from being a theist is ultimately bad and damaging, at what point are the tactics vindicated by the goal?
Well, there's obviously going to be a clear line. It's going to depend on the damage involved, but as I said, for me, the bigger.
If religion is a lie,
a falsehood we're talking about here.
Well, I mean, if you know that something's a falsehood, and David Silver, see, this is part of the problem where if he had more time to make the nuance, I think he would distinguish between people like Peter Popoff and people like the pastor down the street who really, really does believe in Jesus.
Well, he does make that distinction.
Okay. But I think when he talks about religious people being liars, I think that's who he's talking about. But once again, I mean, he's, it's just I don't think we can have it both ways. I don't think, particularly people who veer towards anti-theism, I don't think they can have it both ways. I think if they think that if this is destructive and dangerous, then get them away from it now, patch the holes up in their feelings later, and move on with life. Like I really don't think that people who are anti-theists or who go close to there can have it both ways.
Well, that's one of the things I don't like about most people who call themselves anti-theists. Too many of them will just sort of play fast and loose with the facts. They have any old argument will do attitude that I deplore in apologists, and I don't like it anymore in counter-apologists. That's my feeling about it. There's an intellectual hypocrisy here while trying to claim the intellectual high ground, right? You don't get to claim that you live in the kingdom of reason and have a respect for truth and evidence, and then dispense what you know are bad counter apologetics, right? Now, in fact, I have to admit, I don't think that Silverman is knowingly dispensing bad counter apologetics. I think he's just not very good at these sorts of arguments, and is just satisfied that these will do. I don't think he cares whether these are bad arguments or not. I think he thinks that they're satisfying. They'll do the trick. They're easy to express and promulgate out there, and that's it. I think he believes that they are effective counters, because I just think he's just not sophisticated enough about this, and I think he's not sophisticated enough about it because he's so independently convinced that that God doesn't exist and all arguments for it are bullshit, that he's satisfied with a counter-apologetic without looking into whether or not it actually rebuts what it sets out to rebut. That's my view. I don't think he's that cynical, but I mean he's cynical to the extent that he's easily satisfied with a counter-argument, right? But there are people out there who are of the any old counter-apologetic will do, right? And that's terrible. That doesn't redound to our credit, and it's not going to make a better world. It's not going to make a more rational world. We can get rid of theism tomorrow, and if all we've got is a bunch of people who are crap at reasoning and critical thinking, and have no greater respect for scientific values and evidence than they do right now, we're just going to be awash in New Age twaddle overnight, right? That won't be a better world. Right?
Well, I don't think necessarily one leads to the other one.
No,
I mean, look, listen. I would much rather be confronted with somebody who says, who says science works. I don't know why. I don't care why. All I know is it works, and I'm going to trust scientists. I would rather be confronted with a great morass of those people than I would rather be confronted with the opposite, who wear the name of theist. I mean,
right.
Those are
the choices I was thinking of, though.
If human history has taught us nothing, it's taught us that there are always going to be a large lump and chunk of people who couldn't think if you put a gun to their head, really wouldn't want to in any case. So I'm satisfied that if we could just get those people to believe the right things without thinking, for crying out loud, then we can't. In an ideal world, everybody would have a love of learning and thought and understanding and come and let us sit and reason together. And would you like some grapes? Oh yes, thank you very much. That's an ideal world, but you and I both know people who have heads like cement blocks, and honestly, it's enough for me that they at least aren't dangerous. And if we can get them believing in science and believing that the people with the lab coats on actually likely know more than the people with the cassocks on, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I guess I'm worried about the people who are going around as the self-appointed arbiters of rationality and skepticism and critical thinking. If they are crappy reasoners, right, and they're crappy reasoners because they've been told you're an atheist, therefore you're automatically more reasonable than a theist, and they're going around armed with really, really bad counter-apologetics, and they think that those are great counter-arguments. And if they're going around playing name that fallacy, like God of the Gaps, and they're naming the wrong fallacy, that really worries me. I just think that's not going to be a better world at all.
I understand, but the thing is, Ozzy, the thing about reality is that because reality exists and God doesn't, reality is self-corrective, right? I mean, the thing about theism having bad notions is that there really was no God to come down and say, look, fellas, the book of Titus, just ignore that. But whereas reality tends to be self-correcting, and people who toddle along with bad ideas get to bump into the walls of reality. So that it's messy and it's nasty and it makes you shake your head and go, it didn't have to come to that. But you and I both know that human beings often need to have their attitudes adjusted with a brick wall.
That's true, but that's why magic has practically disappeared from the world, because magic is a technology, right? Spell casting and stuff like that is really quaint and horoscopes and stuff like that, because the predictive failures there are so obvious, right? Sure. The reason religion holds on is precisely because it doesn't abut against reality so easily. extravagant metaphysical claims, and people organize their lives around these metaphysical principles, and their lives are affected, but their beliefs do not result in demonstrations of the falsehoods of their beliefs, right? They don't walk up to reality and bump into it like a hard wall. That's what's so weird about religion, is it's not easy to falsify. And one of the things that we like to point out is that, look, your metaphysical claims are unfalsifiable, right?
But and that's why they need us. That's why they need religion. But once they've been pried away from that mindset, reality, reality will do some of the work for us in terms of correcting bad thinking. And once we've gotten them out of because the religion has become a cocoon, right? It's become a cocoon against bad thinking. As long as you're surrounded by other people who think badly, everything's fine. You just adjust your attitude, and you can just pretend that reality isn't even there. Once we get them out of that mindset, reality will do a good chunk of the heavy lifting for us.
No, once you get them out of the mindset, but the mindset is precisely what insulates people, and I think we're completely in agreement here, that religious mindset is precisely what insulates you against recognizing that reality is bumping up against something that you believe in, right? I mean, you can pray your whole life, and your life doesn't turn out any better than anybody else's.
I am not arguing that with you at all. I'm talking about what happens. I'm saying that once you strip that protective cover off them.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes.
They become more attuned to the fact that if I have a belief and reality directly contradicts that, I can't ignore it. Once I've become the kind of person who believes that reality is real and it's not all up to Sky Daddy. Right.
Okay. Well, let me backpedal then. Yes, I agree with you there. And I think this is why I think when people fall out of their faith, they tend not necessarily to just end up in the New Age. So many people, when they fall out of their faith, have a tendency to sort of want to embrace science, or at least say that they do.
I mean, all the New Agers. I mean, Ozzy, all the New Agers are people who want Jesus but don't want to be told what to do the same way Jesus tells to tend. I mean,
they don't want an organized religion. They want a disorganized religion.
They want religion on their terms. They want spirituality and religion. They want a connection to it all on their terms. I've never bumped into a New Ager who was a completely rational thinker. The way you and I would come to understand it. I'm sure they're out there. I've just never met them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, most people who come to the New Age either come to the New Age because they become disaffected with their religion, or they were never particularly religious, but nor were they particularly interested in science. I mean, that's kind of a weird thing. I read a study a long time ago that showed that the people who were most likely to be suspicious of science were not people who belong to organized religions, but people who are part of the New Age movement. Those people are really profoundly anti-rational, right? They're not even interested in any kind of apologetics for the twaddle that they believe in. So, but that to me is actually in some ways worse than belonging to an organized religion. I mean, walk into a New Age bookstore and walk along and look at the titles and the crystals and all of the nonsense and the tarot cards and the I Ching stones and all that, and you're just confronted with human credulity, yard after yard of it, right? It just goes on and on and on, and those people are way more gullible and sort of more easily, well, they're more gullible, they're more easily gulled into things and exploited than the average religious person, where the average religious person somehow their superstitions and irrationalities tend to be very neatly compartmentalized, whereas people who are into the New Age and who self-identify as spiritual, a lot of them just kind of their irrationality is kind of off the leash. It can go off in any direction. It's not neatly compartmentalized,
Right.
So this is a good time. It's a good time as any. We're going to switch to an after hang. so that we can close this one out and start a new one. And I've got it all set up and ready. So I will go ahead and send links out right now.